Dave Reynoso, the newlywed, is in the house. If we can do the Pledge of Allegiance, I'd appreciate it. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good job.
Oh, which ones?
Good job, Eagle Scout.
What about J2? I know these other ones.
So quiet. Miss CAO.
We have a couple of modifications this morning.
Oh, boy.
Items C27 and C28 have updated resolutions for your board, and those resolutions include non-substantive formatting changes to make the resolution language more clear. In addition, item F6, the corrective action plan was inadvertently not included. That is now included, and hard copies are in board chambers for folks to review.
Cool. That's it?
That's it.
That was easy. Supervisor Bass.
I move we approve the consent calendar with the modifications that were made.
Second.
It's been approved and seconded. How about public comment? Seeing none? Oh.
You guys get used to that. He calls me Nun. I don't think it's flying Nun or anything.
Sister Kent.
Yeah, Sister Kent. Thank you for my opportunity to speak on consent. I'd like to speak on item 30, a temporary increase in pay for Casey Green Risk Manager, pursuant to resolution, and it says regarding compensation plans for designated management and confidential employees. So my understanding is possibly this person will be sitting in and negotiating these kind of contracts. Strongly support a risk management person involved in a lot of your processes like that. It's best to have distance. You need to have a firewall between somebody who might be receiving the money. Of course, that's the problem we had with that 10% increase I still object to, being part of the negotiating team. That's really not a good idea. I also want to say your risk management is very important in this county. I think some of our other duties would be risk management for litigation, some of which comes from these kind of negotiations. And I strongly support you listening to someone in risk management. We seem to be lacking a little bit of that in the county. And when it comes to litigation, hopefully this person, we get to talk on 4 other items a little later in the meeting, will be there for risk management. How to manage your risk and how to buy your way out of litigation and how to avoid litigation by participating in the process. It's extremely critical. And so I'll be addressing that a little later. And that's right, Mike Wilson couldn't make it today. Same as the 3rd day of the Coastal Commission. Imagine that. Thank you for my opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Next. Good morning.
If I may, through the chair.
Sure.
Okay, so I think you might be wanting to talk later on. First, this is the consent agenda. You're welcome.
Thank you, Arnold. I'll be back. Anybody else on the consent count? Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you. So my name's Laura Mojica from 95547, speaking on consent agenda item 6, World Breastfeeding Week awareness, and I'm a lactation consultant and breastfeeding advocate from Fortuna. I want to thank you for continuing to support World Breastfeeding Week. We celebrate it each year between August 1st and 7th. And we'll think about some things here today. Steve Jobs was once quoted as saying, "The people who are crazy enough to change the world are the ones who do." And I want you to have that in the back of your minds as we talk here for the next few minutes. We live in a society where a person is told they can't feed their child without covering up in planes, in a pool, at church, at our own county fair. Why is it so hard for us to watch a parent nurture their child born from their very body, from their body? The theme of this year's World Breastfeeding Week was Empower Parents, Enable Breastfeeding, which is where the rest of us come in, right? You see, breastfeeding isn't just a one-person job. Successful breastfeeding occurs in part due to the support of the people surrounding the breastfeeding parent. Partners and family are crucial supporters after birth. The policies and legislation that support parents to nurture their child are critical for breastfeeding to succeed as well. Some of the most amazing benefits of breastfeeding I know you've heard me talk about before, things like lower risk of asthma and eczema due to changes in the infant gut microbiome, the fact that infants' brains develop a lot more readily when they're held, which is a big part of breastfeeding. All of those benefits represent, as a Patagonia VP put it when referring to a breastfeeding employee, a return on investment that cannot be measured, but I know that it's huge. So, how do we empower our parents and enable breastfeeding in our community, our society, and our country? Well, we need family-friendly workplaces. Both private and government sectors can get on this to help. It can be done. Patagonia has instituted on-site childcare, which prevents parents from having to make the choice of either leaving their babies or leaving their jobs. They have 100% retention of employees who've given birth. That's crazy, right? We need stronger policy to support breaks for breastfeeding parents. You can support State Bill 142, which expands current lactation accommodation laws and expectations for employers. Is it crazy to put better protection in place that allow a parent time to express their milk? We need longer family leave with a minimum of an 18-week leave. In April of this year, the Los Angeles City Council approved a parental leave motion which guarantees a city employee fully paid leave for 18 weeks after birth, adoption, or fostering a child. Isn't that crazy? We need better parental leave for partners. It's crazy to think that we know that fathers who took 2 weeks or more off were more involved with their child at 9 months after birth. So how can we do this? We need to be crazy. We need to be bold in our policies in support of breastfeeding parents, and we can be an example that other cities, counties, states use when writing policy in support of parents. Thanks.
Well, you timed that just perfect. I think, sorry for the 3-minute limit, but I think the importance of what was just said, and in this day and age, and having 3 grandkids, and Steve has like 35, and Virginia has 2, and some on the way, and everything else. But talking with Mary Ann from First 5 and everything else, the difference we make at these young ages and everything else, and we've got all these bands, and then we open smoking lounges. I can never figure out exactly what we're doing here, but I appreciate everything you guys do on that. So we have a couple other ones here. Is Mary Ann Pennekamp here? Is Mary Ann here? Well, we are going to recognize her for her 30 years of service on the Behavioral Health Board. And since, I think, Virginia, you want to say something about Mary Ann real quick, just because you've
Sure,
been
if
on
you
it
do.
about 20?
We felt, it
10?
was a while, 10 at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised she's not here. I was really hoping she would be, because she's always been here.
Probably took her guns away at the check-in.
So if anyone doesn't know Mary Ann Pennekamp, she has been involved in the community for a very long time. I think she was involved in this committee, what was it, 30 years? It was an amazing amount of time. She always, she brought really good information to the table. She really cared about this committee. I was really surprised to see that she was leaving the committee, because I don't think it'll be quite the same without her. And I know her fellow committee members, including Tim Ash and others in the past, really have appreciated her work, and I keep scanning to see if any of them are here. I don't see anyone. So she was a wonderful, wonderful woman, and I hope she's off to do some more fun things. She's got more energy than I do. But I think it's wonderful that we do have that we're recognizing her for all of her time that she's put in for the county. It's not easy.
Agreed.
So.
All right, thank you. Judy Taylor. Is she here? You want to say a couple things about Judy Taylor?
She's retired and off traveling.
So to hell with us.
So
You're not
she
paying
said,
me, I'm not being here.
She said, do it anyway, do it without me. I would
Right.
just like to say that I personally got to hire Judy Taylor like 20-some years ago when she
20.
started with the county. So she's been a wonderful employee, and we'll really miss her knowledge. And I'm so happy for her that she's able to travel all over,
Fairly safe bet she's having more fun than we are today.
for sure.
Most everybody is. And we've got Marco Luna's retirement on here, but I think that's for next week. So, because I don't see a whole bunch of officer guys except for. You're not here for Marco's thing, are you? All right. You just here for the heck of it? We fired security. Are we gonna do Marco's next week?
No, so Marco didn't want a big fuss made about him, but the sheriff requested the resolution anyway. And unfortunately, the sheriff is out of town this week.
I
So
talked to him. Well, then I'm gonna read Marco's in just because
Thank you, Rex.
I've been texting him. He wanted to know if I was gonna have a country western band here for him. We've known Marco's family from the restaurants his mom's had and brothers and everything else, and I've known Marco since he was a pup, and he's gonna kind of probably come back and help a little bit, but he wants to be a cowboy, and he does that on all his spare time. So I'm gonna read this in because Marco's got 29 years with us. Marco Luna will be retiring on August 31st, 2019, after 29 years of employment with the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, Custody Services Division, the jail. Marco was first hired in January 1990 by Sheriff Dave Renner as an extra help correctional officer, and later accepted a full-time correctional officer position in 1991. Officer Luna began participating in the Sheriff's Mounted Posse Patrol, there goes those horses, where he participated in numerous training sessions, parades representing the Sheriff's Office. Officer Luna was retrained as backgrounds investigator in January 1995. He was assigned collateral duties of conducting backgrounds on new Sheriff's Office employees. Officer Luna was promoted to Senior Correctional Officer in 1995. Correctional Officer Luna was assigned to Jail Transition Team in 1996, where he assisted Melinda Cherubini and everyone in training the staff prior to the operation of the new correctional facility. Officer Luna was chosen to attend the National Institute of Correction August 1996 and became one of only 4 people at the time in the Western United States to be certified as an instructor in the new philosophy, direct supervision of housing units. 1998, he was promoted to sergeant. He was assigned by Sheriff Gary Philp in August 2000 to start a recruitment team, proactive in hiring new employees. Sergeant Luna was assigned as the first staff services supervisor in the Custody Service Bureau in September 2002. In July 2004, was instrumental in the development of the Gang Resource Intelligence Team, GRIT, where he continues to participate. Sergeant Luna was appointed the Sheriff's Work Alternative Program Supervisor in 2008, where he enhanced the program immensely with the Wood Project. He was promoted to Lieutenant January 2012. Lieutenant Latuna has been instrumental in promoting the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office as well as recruiting new employees from all across California. He takes trips about every 3 or 4 months when they graduate students down in Merced and down in the valley to look for correctional officers. And due to all his work, we're almost fully staffed at the corrections office. He goes to hiring panels, job markets, career seminars, facility tours, and recruitment trips. Now therefore be resolved, the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors, William Hansel, and the staff of the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office hereby commend Lieutenant Marco Luna for his 29 years of service and wish him success in the saddle. Signed, Rex Bohn. I move this resolution.
It's already,
Yeah, I'm moving it again. Because I can.
Well, we'll second it.
What do you want to say?
I just want to say that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, no, I'm sorry he's not here.
Anyway, yeah, Marco will still be around. He's going to do some stuff for us and help us out, but he has been an exceptional correctional officer. He's been an exceptional employee of Humboldt County. Yeah, he was always good to you when you were arrested.
Yeah. We, my great-granddaddy was a Texas Ranger, so we always teased Marco that in those days they got the biggest crooks and made them Rangers so that they would not be stealing from the public. Anyway, that's just a joke. But I just wanted to put out there that Marco's done a lot of other things in the community. He was just amazing as support for the McKinleyville Rodeo Association and all of the gymkhanas and the junior rodeos and the high school rodeos. And he just really poured his heart into it. And hey, good retirement.
Nope, and I know Sheriff Hansel's out of town moving his son into college, and he's been very proud to work with Marco for quite a few years. And like I said, he's just a good kid. He's done a lot with high school rodeo over the last few years. He's got a young daughter coming up, and she just started riding, so maybe he's got another 4 years of high school rodeo. Well, now you want to say something.
Well, so, yeah, I just want to say that really appreciate everything that Marco has done for our community and for the Corrections Department. He's moved with the times and been very, very eloquent in making the case for the changes that were needed to be made, and I think is a very strong leader. I appreciate all the work he's done for Humboldt County.
Perfect. With that, all right, we've had public comment. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None, which is good since some of those are 4/5. And no matters by board members. We go to Department of Health and Human Services. Right?
How about
Oh, public comment on non-agenda items, I'm sorry. Seeing none? What? Oh, there's Patricia Ray.
No, she's here for the housing.
This is now Donna's turn. Donna Davis from AT&T. And with that, I'd like to invite the Cancer Crushers. Donna's here from AT&T. Back in last year in September, we do a fundraiser at RCRC when I was chair, and we were able to have quite a rambunctious auction, and RCRC and all its friends brought back around $61,000 back to the county, and were able to distribute it amongst 8 nonprofits that I got to pick. And Donna she was so moved by it, and AT&T, she has brought a check for the Cancer Crushers. And go ahead, you take it from there.
Good morning, Supervisor.
Pull it down, you can, it moves.
I'm short, sorry about that. AT&T External Affairs, my name's Donna, as Rex said, and I'm here, it's my pleasure to be able to present this check to Pete and the Cancer Crushers for the amazing work that they do in the Humboldt community. I know that probably all of us have been touched by cancer through friends or family, and really the way that the community rallies to support those families makes all the difference. And the work that Pete and his team have done over these years and the momentum they've continued to accrue is a real testament to the community here in Humboldt. So it's my pleasure to present this check to Pete and the Cancer Crushers.
And on behalf of the California Cancer Crushers, we would like to thank Supervisor Bohn, RCRC, and AT&T for that generous donation. And we are a local nonprofit on our community, and so what we do is our mission is to support families and children dealing with cancer in our community. And our proceeds go to St. Jude's, local families, breast health care project, and also the our scholarship fund. And with the generous donation that we got this year, we were able to provide 5 additional scholarships. So we're thank the community for their continued support, because without them, we wouldn't be able to support the others in need. Thank you.
Thank you. Pete?
Thank you, Rex. Appreciate it. Thank you, Donna, very much again. We appreciate it for the California Cancer Crusher and all that you guys have done for us. And you too, Rex. We appreciate all of the help that you've done for us and continue doing. We hope the very best for the community and for people not getting cancer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete. Anybody else? Well, I'm proud to be I could sit on the bench on the team, but I've been there since day one, and
You're an honorary member, Rex, okay? We appreciate it.
But they've gone to, they do fundraisers for families that need help, and they come in and organize the fundraisers. They have the Wings for a Cure, which raised over $60,000 last year. And there's no executive director or anything else. It's just a bunch of good people doing good things in Humboldt County. And so I really appreciate being part of it. You guys do an amazing job. It's nice to be recognized from people outside the area, RCRC and AT&T, because the work you're doing does make a difference. And so we've had, sure.
So I didn't know this was on non-agenda item, but I would just like to share that my daughter is a cancer survivor, and the Cancer Crushers were there for my family. And she was also a Cancer Crusher scholarship recipient. So I just wanted to show that it does come back to our community. It's very important, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Who's going to Sac State on Thursday? Bring it back to the board.
I just want to say, I know we're a little out of process here, but I really want to thank you guys so much. And I love your dynamic, you know, Cancer Crushers with those big wheels, and I see the pink semis and everything else. It's just so good. It's such a good spirit to instill in people who are fighting cancer and who are dealing with it. And I just know that from Tracy's daughter, you know, that feeling of like, we're gonna beat this, we're gonna do it. And I love the whole dynamic. So thank you so much for all of your efforts.
By the way, we'd like to invite all of you guys to our next Wings for a Cure coming up in next April in 2020.
Keep trying to convince them. Virginia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, every time I love getting, being able to sit in that big Cancer Crusher pink machine is wonderful. But what I think when you guys kind of got, I think, started with a lot of us during the Relay for Life and back in the day, and so many of our teams have fallen by the wayside. I mean, because I remember the years and years I was involved. And you guys have gone way beyond that. And I think that's what is so unique about your team and about your efforts, because it's not just about that one moment in time, it's a continual process. And then to think forward and actually offer scholarships, I think that's an even, that's really nice new direction. And I just really appreciate all that you guys do. And I didn't realize I know most of you too. It's like.
We appreciate very much. And I started this thing, of course, years ago, but you know what? I couldn't do it without these ladies behind me. They're the arm and the back of this whole thing. And I really, really appreciate them very much. And thank you.
Oh, come on, Pete. They're fun to hang out with, too.
I would also like to invite everyone this weekend at the Small Women's Club. There's a fundraiser for a nice young lady. She's 33 years old. She's fighting liver cancer. And it will be a silent auction and a fish fry.
Suzanne?
No, it's Amanda Freemantel.
That's what her mom was, Suzanne.
Yes.
Yep.
So please come out. Small Women's Club, 5:30 Saturday night.
And she was our honoree, our Hat Pass benefactor. We do a Hat Pass every year at the Wings. And I think this year it always raises just a hat we pass around, and in 5 minutes we raise between $2,500 and $4,000 every year to help the family out immediately. And it's kind of a cool thing.
Supervisor Bohn, when you said
Sure.
that, I thought it was Amanda, because Amanda, her mom worked for me for years. Amanda went to school with my kids. Amanda used to hang out at my house, and I remember seeing her when she was first diagnosed. And you guys, she mentioned, that you were there to support her.
She has to travel to UCLA for all of her treatments, so it's quite a hardship on her family. So we are trying to do whatever we can to help her.
Yeah, and just for county perspective, we do have the CAOs down there ready to try to help find a place that she can live in after she has it. Once she actually,
Gets her transplant.
yeah, so.
All right. Thanks, you guys. I appreciate it. Karen, Alicia, thanks for stepping up with all you guys. And Dennis Mayo.
I thought Kent was ahead of me. Sorry, I've got these things.
I don't have.
It might be one for you guys too. Another one for the press. So I can't see very well. So here's a letter from Renee Salcedo in the papers that you all should look at, and I'm going to comment on that. Working on everyday bootstrap issues for our daily lives requires a commitment to honesty. from schools, jobs, public works, equity. They all require positive, well thought out legislative and policy decisions and developing a love for our community. The constant gasoline and matches, virtue signaling, and shaming by some is horribly unproductive. I work every day trying to develop constructive partnerships, so this letter from Renee Salcido saddens me, and again is not productive. This is someone who supported this nut job McCloskey for the Board of Supervisors, came to McKinleyville and simply antagonized our whole community, could not get along at HSU or at CR or at the Humboldt Area Foundation. The message seems toxic and it needs to change. Then I have a letter that I sent to you from Don Allen, who is a Salcido supporter as well. And he puts out this explicit, horrible attack. It's not subjective or open for interpretation. It's not a click on a silly Facebook joke. It's not an often quoted movie line. Straight to the jugular, hatred. I'd like you to agendize this for a meeting so that it can be condemned. We can and must do better. I'll read this missive from Mr. Allen. Garth Sundberg's statement that they were going to build a hotel regardless of what the commission said had me thinking, why the F are we wasting our time and everyone's time there? Us poor Indians line is just a way to exert tribal sovereignty. Obviously swayed by commissioners. It obviously swayed some commissioners. Reverse discrimination. And here I thought I'd be polite and give them respect I thought they deserved. They obviously don't care about our community. The Sundberg family lies at the heart of this corruption. They brought in Las Vegas money when they built the casino, replacing a prefab metal warehouse with a bingo parlor and current casino. Notice who has the choice location on the Rancheria, the Sundbergs. The Rancheria is there so that they can build their empire. Guys, this is wrong. This is the messages that are coming in our community that we have to rebel against. We have to be honest about the horrible negative messaging. It works. The negative messaging works. It stirs people up, but it divides us, and it doesn't work for solutions. Please put this on your agenda and condemn this horrible, explicit piece of trash.
Thank you. Next.
Kent Sawatsky, I wish to acknowledge our veterans. A lot of them, my dad passed here 2 weeks ago, World War II, veteran, 94 years old. And he has this appreciation, certificate of appreciation for being in the Army from 1944 through 1946 with a Purple Heart. And I have the Purple Heart here too. It'll be going to my nephew. My dad was an excellent shot. Back in Kansas, they had to live by shooting rabbits. And I don't know if any of you have been rabbit hunting before, but that takes some skill. And my dad never wanted to talk about his war experiences very much at all. Other than a lot of his friends and acquaintances, most of them died. And so he had what you call PTSD, I think is the correct term. And that was with him his whole life. So a lot of them came back not only wounded with the Purple Heart, but wounded mentally also, and a lot of them dealt with issues their whole life, as all of our veterans do these days. And it's a shame that we have to go to war. It's a nature, I guess the nature, we're that scorpion on the back of the frog. We just keep getting halfway across the river and stinging the frog. So until that stops, we're going to continue to have people. To memorialize my dad a little bit, he could drive a car at 94 very well. There was not a scratch in his Prius that was 6 months old. He always got new ones and then gave them to other family members. So 2 weeks before he passed, he was planning a trip over to Chico to visit our family members over there that had been burned out of paradise and had to move. So he was going to get in his car and go, and it was just like that. That quickly, his lungs gave out, and it was time for him to pass on. So Jasper Sawatsky is who I'm memorializing today, and also all of the other veterans who've served and the sacrifices that they've all made. And so it's important for all of us when you see somebody like that. There's not hardly anybody left for me to have a service for him for, because at 94 most of his friends and acquaintances passed. Part of his service was very unique. He was a typing teacher. And so what he had was, I think there were like 20 or 30 people in General Eisenhower's typing pool, because he had all these things to do. So we always kidded Dad, did he get his Purple Heart from something, a typing accident or something like that? But that was quite a job, you know, having that thing with that kind of thing going on. But he didn't want to talk about things. He did bring back something. He was going down a hallway once, and he had enough sense to turn around on somebody, and that person had a Luger, a little .25, and he said, well, if I hadn't taken that from them, then I probably would not be here today. So a shout out and thank you to the veterans, and if you get a chance to visit one go to like Timber Ridge or somebody like that and say hello to the older people, they would like to have you do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kent. That was nice. Next.
Good morning. I'm Caroline Griffith. I'm a resident of Eureka. Sorry, I didn't put my name on the list. I didn't expect to speak this morning, but I was kind of inspired by Mr. Mayo asking you to agendize something, and there is something that has been on my mind for a while that I would like the Board of Supervisors to consider. I come to meetings fairly regularly because I have the luxury of having a schedule where I can do that. 9 a.m. on a Tuesday is a very difficult time for a lot of people who care about their community and who care about things that are on the agenda to drop what they're doing. Many of them don't have the option of doing that because they have to go to work and they cannot just take time off to participate in the public process. I also attend Eureka City Council meetings a lot, and that's a group of people that are paid significantly less than you guys. They tend to work regular jobs, and they come to meetings in the evening after they've worked all day, and sometimes stay for 5-hour-long meetings. It's pretty grueling. So I don't think that it would be a hardship for the Board of Supervisors to consider moving the time that they meet to actually involve more people in the political process. I unfortunately have to leave today early, so I'm not going to be able to speak on the items and listen to the discussion on the items that I would like to. And I have a number of friends that have had the same situation happen, and they're not able to be here today. So I know that maybe a few months ago you were working out, I don't know the exact terminology of it, but your job descriptions, and that you all get to vote on your job descriptions, and you have the power to change when you do meet. So I would like you to consider that in order to open up this public process to more of the public and to have a more democratic discussion about what our county looks like. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Seeing no one else, I'll close that part of the meeting and take us into Department of Health and Human Services now, since we still have a lot of you here.
All right. Good morning, Chair Bohn, Supervisors, CAO, and County Council. My name is Michelle Stevens. I'm the Public Health Director with DHHS. I'm going to try to fix the mic. I'm here with two wonderful colleagues of mine who will introduce themselves.
So I'm Laura Mojica. I think you heard me a little bit earlier today. I'm a local lactation consultant at St. Joe's and Redwood Memorial Hospitals. I also have a very small private practice. And I did want to just point out that all of the work I do for the committee is as an unpaid volunteer, including being here today, because I feel like this work is so important. So thanks for hearing us.
Good morning. My name is Mary Ann Hansen, Executive Director of First 5 Humboldt, and I'm happy to join my team members this morning.
Thank you for having us. So we're members of a work group addressing cannabis use during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and we're a work group of the Perinatal Substance Use Disorder Project. We're very happy to be here today. It's been a long road to get here. So today, let me have to manage that at the same time. Today, we'll briefly share some background about the project, and we'll go over some data around women experiencing substance use disorder in Humboldt County, and then we'll get to the work group, the resolution, and educational material that the work group produced. So the project began in 2016 as a partnership between DHHS Public Health, the Humboldt Independent Practice Association, California Center for Rural Policy, St. Joe's First Five, medical providers, a whole group of folks who serve the population with a purpose of developing new practice norms to improve delivery of care for pregnant women, new moms and babies impacted by substance use disorder in the county. Our initial goals were to map existing community resources for prenatal substance use disorder intervention, analyze system strengths, and identify gaps with the goals of better integration of services and coordination of care, and to create and maintain clear, widely recognized, and evidence-based guidelines on how to carry out and respond to pre- and postnatal drug screening and testing. We have a steering committee made up of people with cross disciplines and that organizes and guides our work. And we reviewed the data, interviewed women with lived experience about their experience in prenatal care while having a substance use disorder, as well as providers, and developed strategies to address rates of perinatal substance use disorder here in the county. We're currently implementing a prenatal substance use screening tool called the 4Ps in prenatal practices. We established a perinatal care navigator at St. Joe's, and she is supporting women experiencing a substance use disorder while pregnant. And we're increasing access to medication-assisted treatment for the population and working on consistent messaging related to cannabis use during pregnancy, which is what this work group is all about. These on the slide, these are the main themes that came out of the interviews of women with lived experience. Many respondents spoke about the need for clear messaging in the medical and service provider community on cannabis use when they're pregnant and breastfeeding. So that's what this work group was born out of. Before we get into the cannabis work, we'll share just a little bit of data around perinatal substance use disorder for context. This data comes from the State Office of the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, and is defined as any substance use diagnosis per 1,000 hospitalizations of pregnant females ages 15 to 44. So the number, as you can see, so the red is Humboldt County, the gray is California. The number of women reporting to hospitals and being diagnosed has increased over the years of 2004 to 2005, which is across the bottom there. In 2015, the California rate was 19 and the Humboldt County rate was 70.6, approximately 3 times higher than California. So we knew just by looking at this and the next slide of data that we have, our suspicions were correct, that we have a challenge here in Humboldt County around this issue. This data also comes from the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. Again, the rate is higher than the state of California. It's based on it's defined as any admission or hospitalization with any substance-affected diagnosis for infants ages 0 to 89 days per 1,000 hospital births. So the rates are mainly based on substance use exposure at birth for neonatal abstinence syndrome, which is for opioids, and fetal alcohol syndrome diagnosis. The data only accounts for babies who were hospitalized during birth and or 89 days after birth, and if the hospital did not drug test the mother or baby and give the baby a substance use diagnosis, this would not be captured in the data set. An important note is the gap in data on how many babies are born testing positive for THC specifically in Humboldt County. It's an area we're working on, but this data does include babies testing positive for THC, opioids, methamphetamine, alcohol, etc. combined.
So this isn't a new topic by any means. However, the legalization of cannabis for adult use, with the legalization of cannabis for adult use, the conversation about recommendations for the use of cannabis while pregnant or breastfeeding has been emphasized statewide. The California Department of Public Health conducted research surveying pregnant and breastfeeding women in several jurisdictions across the state on their perception of the risk and reasons for using cannabis. CDPH also provided public health jurisdictions with recommendations on addressing this topic in our own communities. The retail environment offers a lot of different options for cannabis consumer use, including products with different amounts of CBD and THC. With this brings beliefs about the safety of the products being consumed. Most notably is the decrease in the perception of harm among pregnant and breastfeeding women while using cannabis. And without research-based messaging, women are relying on their peers and on CBD or cannabis businesses for their information. While there is some research on the effects of cannabis use in this population, and more is definitely needed, there is no known evidence that shows that the use of cannabis while breastfeeding or pregnant is safe. The work group that Michelle alluded to has included members from First 5 Humboldt, the First 5 Independent Practice Association, and the North Coast Health Improvement and Information Network, Child Welfare Services, Public Health, United Indian Health Services, Humboldt State University Child Development Department, Moonstone Midwives Birth Center, Kamau Medical Center, St. Joseph's Health, Humboldt County, Open Door Community Health Centers, DHHS Public Health and Mental Health SUD programs, local pediatricians, obstetricians, gynecologists, and lactation consultants. There's a lot of effort that went into developing the recommendations that we're presenting to you today. We want to develop educational material for women who are pregnant and breastfeeding or plan to be, and have some materials to share, and clinical guidelines as well for healthcare providers. Our intention is for healthcare providers to have conversations with women about the risks and barriers for stopping their use of cannabis during this time, to take a pause, and if they feel that they can't take a pause, to explore what's underlying that and what we can do as a system to support them. We used material out of Colorado for the brochure as a starting place and made revisions to match our unique culture in Humboldt County. And the clinical guidelines came from California Department of Public Health and California Department of Public Health. That brings us to the resolution before your board today. We first reviewed the research and developed the policy statement that we turned into a resolution to emphasize its significance and relevance across the county. We have had such a long-rooted history with cannabis here in Humboldt County, and with the widespread lack of messaging around its use when pregnant or breastfeeding, we knew there needed to be some clarity provided so that women are getting the most accurate information to promote healthy pregnancies and healthy babies and families. We support a harm reduction approach. However, there needs to be a baseline message about cannabis use in pregnancy and breastfeeding as a starting point in the conversation with women that we serve. Our next steps are, in addition to presenting this resolution and educational material to your board today.
We skipped one.
Oh.
We skipped
Oh, okay, great, sorry.
They know that I love to talk about the data. That's my favorite part of all of this. So she was setting me up for the big swing, right? So we reviewed quite a bit. There's a lot of research studies and guidelines out there done by various entities. And we know that cannabis use in pregnancy can affect the fetus's developing brain. And so that's something really important that we pulled from a study looking at school achievement in 14-year-olds youth prenatally exposed to. This was from 2011, so we were still calling it marijuana at that time, from the Journal of Neurotoxicology and Tetralogy. Okay. We also had multiple studies that indicate that smoking cannabis during pregnancy can increase the risk of low birth weight, and we know that low birth weight has lifelong effects for these children who are born smaller than expected. We have the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists that recommended women who are pregnant or contemplating pregnancy should be encouraged to discontinue marijuana use, or cannabis use as we're calling it, and note several studies that demonstrate lower birth weight for babies who were prenatally drug exposed. And then we also have tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, the compound that produces a high, being found present in higher concentrations in human breast milk than in the mother's blood. And that's coming from several sources there. The most kind of prominent is the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine and their clinical protocol. They put out a lot of guidelines for healthcare providers to be able to use with breastfeeding parents. So that brings us to our policy statement based on the research that we just kind of talked about and reviewed in the previous slide. And it states, there is no research evidence that shows cannabis use is safe while pregnant or breastfeeding. Cannabis use in pregnancy can affect the baby's brain development. Smoking cannabis during pregnancy may increase the risk of low birth weight. Tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the compound in cannabis that produces a high, is present in higher concentrations in human breast milk than in the mother's blood. Therefore, women in Humboldt County who are contemplating pregnancy, are pregnant, who are breastfeeding, or who plan to breastfeed should avoid using cannabis in any form, smoking, eating, vaporizing, or as lotions or salves.
Now it's my turn again. So, I apologize. Our next steps are, in addition to presenting this resolution and educational material to your board today, to continue presenting the policy statement and resolution, educational material and clinical guidelines to different OB and pediatric clinics and service providers providing services for women and children, and discuss what the research shows and ask questions about how they envision themselves implementing this as a policy in their agencies, what barriers they anticipate, and how the work group can support them. We're providing 100 copies each of the brochures initially to each agency, and the electronic printable PDF copy, so ongoing printing can occur by each agency. We plan to follow up a few months after presenting to check on their progress. And we have contact information if you have questions.
Thanks, Marion. What are the chances of, and maybe it's already being done, having a posting at dispensaries and things like that, making that a requirement? I mean, we put warning labels on everything, and this is a direct relation. It doesn't seem like, I'm looking at our building and planning guy who's not paying attention, but if we license, could we make that a requirement for dispensaries to, at least have this posted? Because, and probably at farms. I'm saying they have to post, their workman's comp, they have to post everything else. I don't think it's a bad idea that these people have this in their head all the time.
I'll let Michelle
Just a
answer,
thought.
but we have discussed how we can support cannabis farmers in our county with posting information, just so that we're being supportive about accurate info in that case. And I'll defer to Michelle regarding posting in dispensaries.
And I think our legal family farmers and things like that would probably, they would join in this wholeheartedly, because most of them are parents and stuff.
I'd say that's a fantastic idea. And I'd be happy to work with the planning and building department on that, or whoever else. I'd have to look into what exactly that would entail to require folks, unless it's a recommendation or
You guys go, my work is
we can
done.
make them. That would be great. Thank you for the suggestion.
So I know this is early days, and especially with regard to cannabis, there's a lot of research that has to be done. I know that you talk about doing focus and studies. Can you tell me a little bit more about what those studies would entail?
Oh, I see. For the organizations and agencies that we're doing we're currently in the middle of doing presentations to them. They get the packet that you all get, along with a post-presentation survey to find out how we did, and also ask what kind of implementation strategies or support they need from the work group. It's not just the medical providers having conversations with women, it's the office staff, it's everybody that supports that or agency or organization. And so we're doing multiple presentations in terms of sharing the research and having peers talk to peers. Medical folks, licensed folks want to talk to other licensed folks, and so we're matching those folks up together to talk more. The California Department of Public Health that Marianne was speaking to before has provided some guidance to jurisdictions, public health jurisdictions, about messaging, and they did a study in California and held focus groups, but they only did the middle. They call it the northern part of the state, but we know that's not it. That's not true. And the most like county to us or area that they said was closest to Humboldt was Chico, which we know is not. And so we're actually, this work group and the project group are working towards finding some funding in order to be able to do more research here, or surveys around women for what are their reasons for use, so that we can target more messaging in addition to what we've already produced. because there's different reasons, there's different groups of people who use cannabis for different reasons in different ways and different amounts. And so we want to be able to get the best messaging and information out there so that they'll be able to kind of hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are a lot of, you point correctly that Humboldt is very involved in the cannabis industry and has been for a long time, and a lot of people who actually believe in the medicinal qualities of it. And I noticed that you talk about THC being in the mother's milk and in the blood, but what about CBD? That's seen as a very beneficial medicinal.
And more benign, I think, is what people perceive it as too. And I think our answer to that, we've been asked that question before, and I think our answer to that is that I don't know that there's enough research to say that there's 0 THC in 100% THC-free CBD. It's marketing, and so I don't know that you can actually say that. And because of that, just like with THC and cannabis, there's no research that shows what amount is safe. And so with the lack of information, that's the position that we're recommending, is that until there is more information, take a pause if you're using cannabis when you're pregnant or breastfeeding. And if you can't, the harm reduction approach is to have a conversation about, well, why is that? Let's talk about why that is and how you might reduce your use and things like that. So our position is the same around CBD as it is with THC right now. And with more information, that could change. You know, with more research that comes out, that could change.
Yeah, I know another thing that would be worth looking at is that people who are addicted to stronger drugs, if they can't be taking those, might want to do something that relieves them while they're, so that would be another thing to look at. And
Exactly.
Finally, you talked about low birth weight, and that basically was related to smoking, right? So the salves would be something else to look at, just.
Right.
That's why I asked about
right.
the study. There's a lot of questions still out there about that.
Yes, exactly. And I think the medical community, and this is what women said in the focus groups, is that there's just inconsistent messaging. We experienced that with public health nurses not knowing what to communicate to women. Child welfare social workers are also hearing them say, my doctor told me it was perfectly okay and safe, but then other doctors are saying, I can't believe they're saying it's okay and safe. So with the legalization for adult use, we just felt like we needed to have some based on the current research as it is now, knowing that, and hopefully there'll be more funding put into more research, and there's new studies coming out all the time. And pretty predominantly, the message is and the recommendation is to avoid it right now.
Great. Thank you.
Super. Bess? Madrone? Nothing? Okay. The only thing I can say going from this, I do like the idea of maybe you working with Director Ford and bringing something forward to us for when if more dispensary stuff come along and retroactiving league. So there is a posting. And you've got the brochures here. So if somebody asks, maybe they'll have a brochure on the counter or something like that. We have it.
That's good.
Yeah. They're all on our list of folks that we're doing outreach to in terms of how much they like the information. So if we can.
And sometimes we get nodding heads, and I think most of the dispensary owners are pretty responsible, but I think maybe we put a little teeth into it that requires it, and then, you know, it's a no-cost issue, so it's just public acknowledgement and knowledge. So thank you guys very much. Public comment?
Ken Sawatsky, you mean it's not just unicorns and the whole thing, the THC? There's maybe a negative part to this? Unbelievable. Flying on an airplane back when we had the egg beaters out here, so it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, I flew back on an expert who was flying off to Switzerland. And he was going to talk to, this is his field. He had all the degrees, talked way above my head, and I had a hard time understanding. But he felt that the future of THC was that it was a genetic slider, where they would actually be able to manipulate negativity out of your genetics. And the question I asked him at that time was, does that mean the people taking it are randomly altering their genetics? And he says, we don't know. Strongly support the acknowledgement that this could be a serious problem. We have alcohol syndrome babies. We all know what that's like. We also know what all the other drugs do to people and what's that like. I don't even know if caffeine could have a negative consequence. Though the posting is already there in the dispensaries to a degree, but doesn't have the specificity that you're talking about, which hopefully you guys will get out there if we can get John to wake up again, and they had to do it, John. Anyway, strongly support you moving forward with this. It's been my fear for a long time, and I can give you an example of what I refer to as lack of productivity and long-term THC impairment. I went to a legal meeting, and I'm not going to say which one it was. Some of you can guess. We were talking about strategy. 3/4 of the way through the meeting, some of your best quality Sohum, one joint was passed around the room and shared by probably 8 people. The meeting slowed down to the point where I was wasting my time, so I excused myself because nothing further was to be done. People say there's no negativity to what's out there these days, but if you look at the lack of production when things slow down to non-existent, and hopefully this is not what's happening to the children. You know me, I'm all about taking care of the children, and I hate to see people out there who are causing potential long-term medical problems with their children until we get the science down. I totally support. Do the science. It's so far past due. This should have been 30 years ago when they started the science. Then we'd have studies, we'd have knowledge, and I'm hoping the CBD doesn't have a negative consequence. But until the studies are done, I strongly support what your staff is bringing forward, and great idea, Rex, on the notifications getting out to everybody in every way we can of possible risk.
Thank you. Connie?
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Board of Supervisors. I'm Connie Stewart from the California Center for Rural Policy at Humboldt State University, and I'm here to thank the staff and all of our partners on working on this. I just want you to know it's a very thorough process that we went through to come up with this recommendation, and it was amazing at the meeting when we shared it with all the providers, and they all were like, yes. And so it's well supported by the provider community, and I think it's important for us to get this message out there, and I just urge you to pass the resolution.
Great, thank you. Seeing no more comment, I'll bring it back to the board. Supervisor Madrone?
I would move passage of the resolution.
Second.
Second.
She can have the second.
Okay, and that's with the caveat that you guys are going to work together on the side, just an acknowledgement of that. Supervisor Fennell?
I don't know, are they in this packet? I just saw the, oh yeah, they are in the packet. These handouts, the fold-out and the rack cards are really, really good. And I think got good suggestions in them, so nice artwork.
Agreed.
Pass that along. Thank you.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Passes. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
And with that, see you, Connie. Okay, item 1 is we're going to continue the public hearing regarding zoning and text amendments to August 27th due to the absence of a board member today who has a personal day today. Same thing as the sheriff, taking a child to college. Very important.
That is correct, and we just simply recommend a continuance to August 27th.
Is that an acknowledgement, or do we vote on that? Yes. It's a motion, okay.
I move that we continue this item to the August 27, 2019 agenda.
Second.
Moved and second. Public comment?
I have a personal day every darn day, but I show up here just about every single Tuesday. That's just my perception. I strongly support you going ahead and showing the consideration for our absent supervisor on this issue. You folks may need it yourself sometime. I do wish to make comment in case I'm no longer alive, you never know, or don't attend the next meeting. I strongly support not making changes and moving forward with this with the recommendation that the Planning Commission brought forward to you. After all the time that's been spent on this, I support changes being made later. We have, I believe, 4 general plan amendments we do during the year, and those changes can be made, vetted thoroughly with the public so that you have public participation. It's within your power to change anything at the dais. But I find that to be not in the best interest as far as what the public likes to see and participate. So that's my strong recommendation. Gives you a whole week to think about. And you all have my phone numbers multiple times. If you wish to communicate with me further on those topics and wish to dissuade me from that opinion as far as how we should proceed, I'm happy to take your phone calls, even one from Mike Wilson.
Tina Christensen, I'm not giving you out my phone number.
I got it.
Anyway, I'm here representing, well, I'm representing myself, but I want to, I have approached a lot of groups on this general plan. I'm very disappointed that this is happening. I think that you have a general plan that you passed. I think that you will discover that these amendments are amendments and that they are not part of the general plan that was approved. And I think that if they want changes, then they are amendments. I think that you have a EIR that has been vetted and that has passed, and I think that those things will show you that they were not recognized in the EIR. So I think there's a lot of issues that you really need to look at before you start messing with a 20-year-old general plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Seeing no one else, bring it back to you, Mr. Ford.
We would recommend that the board continue this to August 27th, 2019.
Okay. Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? 4-0. And now, you're back up again.
Yes, we are. Good morning, Chair Bohn and members of the Board of Supervisors. John Ford with Planning and Building. Joining me is Michael Richardson, Michelle Nielsen, and Mary Milner to present the 2019 housing element. Before Ms. Nielsen gives a more detailed presentation, I just would like to make a couple of introductory statements. First of all, we're privileged to present the recommendation by the Planning Commission to adopt this housing element. The Planning Commission made this recommendation with a 6-0 vote after considering it over a period of 3 meetings. Also attached to the board report is a letter from the State Department of Housing and Community Development stating that the proposed housing element meets all the legal standards required for certification by HCD. So we're really excited and feeling very good about being able to present to you a document that has been vetted by the public, been vetted by the Planning Commission, and been vetted by HCD. This has been prepared and refined in a very public process. It reflects the understanding that the standard way of preparing housing elements, which is to identify that there's enough zoned property to build housing on, has failed to work, that something different needs to be done. And so what it begins to do is turn that corner and identify that the county will begin to step into the gap to facilitate development of housing. Generally, the comments at the Planning Commission have been positive. I think that if there were any contrary comments, it would be that people would like to see the housing element go further, but that generally people are supportive and appreciative of the direction that the housing element is taking. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Nielsen.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. Thank you. So the goal of a housing element is to meet statutory requirements, which with a lot of recent flurry over probably beginning in 2016, 2017, there have been many substantial amendments to housing element law. So it needs to meet these detailed statutory requirements. It needs to respond to public input and consider the housing needs of all residents in the community. In the county, it's the unincorporated area, and it's regardless of income level. So everyone who is above moderate, market rate housing to those who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness. As Director Ford described, here's a bit of the context. We did 2 rounds of public workshops in 4 dispersed locations in the community. Went to Southern Humboldt, went to Willow Creek, we were up in McKinleyville, and then of course in Eureka. The Planning Commission deliberated on this. There were 3 public hearings, which were preceded by a public workshop. The public hearings began in May of this year, and our last one before the Planning Commission was in July. And the content before you is the result of input and ideas from the community, and directly reflect that from the Planning Commission, and of course the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. Unlike all the other elements of the general plan, only the housing element is the one that is subject to certification by the state. And a lot of state and federal funding programs, in order to be eligible, having a certified housing element is a threshold requirement. And part of those requirements, in addition to ticking all the boxes with regard to the statutory, is that you meet the timeline that is also spelled out in state law. And for the county, we have a compliant housing element, the current one we're under, also referred to as the 5th cycle, until August 31st. So it is a short timeline, but we've been out in the community, been a lot of input, a lot of opportunities for engagement. So just briefly an overview of the housing element. So it does continue in the tradition of housing elements, making some incremental changes, improvements to the content and the policies, but also it does take some bold approaches. It is overall altogether represents a paradigm shift if it's adopted as presented from the status quo, from business as usual of just, we're just going to tweak the zoning regulations. It moves the planning and building department to this active partnering role with the private sector developers and the community developers, and also to work actively with other county agencies and also with the incorporated cities to address the housing needs of the community. And this is my first housing element rodeo, so to speak. But the input we heard as through this process was pretty consistent, that the status quo was not working, that it was going to take more than just tweaking the zoning regulations. So to give you some context of kind of the baseline conditions, the growth rate in Humboldt County continues to be relatively low, less than 1%. The regional housing need assessment requirements, these are requirements of how much projected housing need for your community divided by income category is very similar. I'll go have a slide that has a little more detail on that in a moment. And that our biggest need continues to be for units that are affordable to low income or lower households. As we heard at the Planning Commission, is that for housing to be affordable to these income categories, it has to be subsidized housing. And then it's about 70% based on data in May, that about 70% of households in Humboldt County cannot afford a medium-priced house. So this is the RENA, Regional Housing Needs Assessment. This is the breakdown between the two. So the box on the left shows our current cycle. We're at the end of that. The allocation, the projected need based on our growth level or development in the community from 2014. Then you see the side-by-side comparison with our new regional housing needs assessment for what is called the sixth cycle. We are moving, there's some changes in statutory law back in late 2000s that allowed jurisdictions to move their housing elements from a 5-year update cycle to an 8-year update cycle. So that's why you see that difference. But the annualized rate of production overall across the board is pretty close. It's pretty comparable between the 5th cycle and the 6th cycle. So in terms of, those were our projected needs. This is what has actually got constructed using building permits issued under this current cycle. So as you can see, we had an overproduction in moderate income category and very low production in housing that would be affordable to extremely low and very low income households.
Michelle,
yes.
Could you, since we've got the permitted housing, 33 to 44, could you give us examples of each one of those, a unit that was built under that category so we can get a visual?
They were very small. And I think there might have been a couple like accessory dwelling units that were very small. The methodology for estimating the affordability was based on the size of the unit when compared, because we had data on the average construction cost, and we were able to develop a factor to estimate the affordability. That was done as part of the annual progress report filed for 2018. Previous to that, we used income survey data. And
I'm thinking, would the Ria Dale and the units down here on 4th Street qualify for any of this?
Yes, they are. Well, those are all located in the incorporated cities, so they are not reflected in these numbers. These numbers are only for the unincorporated areas.
Okay.
So we don't get those, but those units are, I believe, 100% subsidized.
And then so the unincorporated be the Myrtle Avenue, the Kramer properties? No, they're not actually they're not moderate or low income.
They were
senior housing, but it's not subsidized.
Correct.
Okay.
Those units, based on the size, the number of bedrooms, and what the typical rents for those units, those were classified based on that data, and that they're not subsidized as moderate income units.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So, with the low production in extremely low, very low income categories, that also presents a challenge for the implementation of Housing First, because it's those units that are typically going to be the housing for those folks who are going to be covered by that policy, the board's adopted policy. So this slide just kind of summarizes, gives a high-level overview of what the median home price is. This was prepared in May. Average monthly rent and minimum income requirements. Then also, this was prepared using California Association of Realtors data and the Humboldt State Economic Index from May. So ultimately, this gives a snapshot of what the breakdown is in terms of, might help if I could see it better. Based on the number of households and their earning, what they're earning, as you can see, more than 50% cannot afford and don't have the annual needed median income to buy the typical median priced house, which is just over $67,000. Let me back up a little bit. the needed annual income to afford the typical house, which is about $310,000, you need an annual income of about $67,000. And that's through like a very traditional mortgage, traditional down payment. And then somewhere then in that kind of dark green, you see that there's about 5,300 households that may or may not have that income, meet that threshold, because their income falls in between $50,000 to $75,000 annually. And then we have folks who, over 8,000 households that would be able to, because their income is greater than $75,000. So with that, what's new with the settlement? So it's what it suggests, the background data, the public input, is that the traditional regulatory methodology isn't going to be sufficient to address the housing situation in the county. So this element establishes goals, policy standards, and implementation measures that will make these changes to hopefully get the county out of the way and to enable increased production of housing that is affordable and that there's enough housing for all income categories. And there's we've broken into 4 key areas. That the county will be a proactive partner for housing development. What does that look like? That would be there's an implementation measure 62, which is for fast tracking and streamlining of all housing projects. That implementation measure actually establishes timelines as to when the county will engage with applicants on their building permit applications, when they will issue those building permits, and if the planning building department fails to do, what the consequences are to that if we aren't engaged in working with applicants to get their building permits done. It includes also just part of it would be the more residential technical assistance to have we have the Planner on Duty program, but to make that program more robust than what it is currently. Another change from the status quo is to better respond to the people who are experiencing homelessness or most at risk experiencing homelessness, including policies and implementation measures for supportive housing. There was this in part reflects statutory changes that supportive housing is to be a by right use in commercial and districts or zoning districts where multifamily is permitted. To also update the zoning regulations to move the regulations closer to be with the letter of the statute with regard to emergency shelters. Right now, there's qualifying language in the zoning regulation stipulating where they're mapped in C2M, community commercial, light industrial, industrial commercial, and residential multifamily. Where they're specifically mapped, emergency shelters are principally permitted. There's a policy and implementation measures to remove the qualifying language of the map. It would be the same zoning districts, but it would remove that qualifying language. And the mapping was largely based on housing opportunity zones, which are communities that have community water and sewer. So there are other communities where they're like Willow Creek, the Hoopa area, more Willow Creek, where there are people experiencing homelessness, but there's no ability to do an emergency without a discretionary permit. They would still be subject to a building permit, of course. So improve access to expertise. Part of some of the implementation measures that look at doing this is that residential technical assistance program, where we're out in the communities doing housing seminars and making ourselves available in the outlying areas to help people with their building permit applications or their planning permit applications. To increase the inventory and range of the pre-approved housing plans, and to and to also keep those plans current. Another component of this is to maintain and to update our inventories online of parcels where these uses are allowed, to do some more pre-screening of those and to make that information readily available to the public. And then to this measure, in sum, captures policies and implementation measures that look at tiny houses, movable tiny houses. Right now, a movable tiny house would not be an allowed use except for a special occupancy part. So there's implementation measures to amend the zoning regulations to make that an allowed use and recognize it as a residential structure. There would be a legislative action, because it would take a change to the zoning ordinance. There would be public workshops and public hearings. So there will be a part 2 to actually make these changes. Another one is there was pretty significant changes to state law regarding accessory dwelling units. In county nomenclatures, that's been secondary dwelling units, but to adopt a local regulations that better reflects our local community. So, wait, let me go back, actually. Go. Oops. So the Planning Commission recommendations, as part of their recommendations, they asked that there's two changes that were, or two additions to the implementation measures that were added based on their comments on July 11th. And then there's one, it's not in there because that being the Planning Commission recommended that incentives be retained for affordable housing projects. There was, at one of the hearings, there was a lot of discussion about the affordability of housing, and so staff recommended, well, we could change the measures regarding incentives and make them available across the board. And the outcome they considered that, and outcome on July 11th was to reserve the incentives as they were written for affordable housing projects. So the other two recommendations that are incorporated into the housing element are to do annual progress reports to the Planning Commission, and then at the midpoint of the cycle to do a more robust review on whether a sufficient progress is being made, and if it not, perhaps to further amend the housing element. To look at other measures to improve the housing conditions, that would come to your board, should that come to pass. But the annual progress reports is written in there. And the other one measure that was written was to create partnerships and to support our local tribes, the federally and state recognized tribes, and their efforts to provide housing for the community. And so, with respect to the revisions requested by HCD, they asked that quantified objectives be added to some specific implementation measures. Those have been added to expand the narratives and discussions regarding what progress was made. That was also made. That change was made. Better describe public engagement and update the demographic and housing data to be more reflective of current data. And probably the biggest change was we previously were recommending that the Hubbard Lane parcel be retained in the affordable land inventory, and we documented why, and they disagreed with us, largely because the units, the building permits have been pulled. We don't have evidence to support them as being affordable to moderate above, so they recommended that it be removed in order for us to have a certifiable housing element. The housing element before you incorporates that recommendation.
Is anybody stacking any permits or anything, trying to get some stuff through before the required solar? And I mean, we have the required non-flammable building materials, because we're doing our best to make anything affordable not affordable by adding everything on. You can't buy a stripped down model anymore. So before you ever pour a slab, you're $120,000, $130,000 into a lot, even a small lot. So
I'm aware of several contractors who did pull the building permits they anticipate working on over the course of the next year. They're targeting having those done by the end of 2019. I wouldn't say that's a huge number.
no, understand, but and there's no way we can, if somebody comes in with that affordable housing units, that's all state mandated now, right?
It becomes part of the building code. That's correct.
Okay.
So just briefly, staff has prepared a addendum to the programmatic EIR that was certified for the county's general plan. And then also the Planning Commission resolution, as Director Ford said, their recommendation is for the housing element to be adopted. We did, as part of the Planning Commission resolution, there's language regarding edits are made to the document in response to comments from the Department of Housing and Community Development, that those would be considered minor. And that did transpire. We did receive additional comments subsequent to July 11th, and those, and it's consistent with, those edits are consistent with the language of the Planning Commission's resolution, so it's within the scope of that. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Any questions? Supervisor Fennell?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the ADUs, accessory dwelling units, as a component of this plan.
So the policy language, or I'll say that the implementation measure is to adopt amendments to the zoning regulations to allow accessory dwelling units consistent with state law, which does prescribes pretty strictly what a jurisdiction can regulate with respect to accessory dwelling units. By state law, they are allowed in the zoning districts where residential single-family structures are permitted. Then if there's also limits on what a jurisdiction can regulate with regard to conversion of an existing garage, for example, that may not meet setbacks. It can be converted to an accessory dwelling unit without having to meet the setbacks. There's standards regarding parking if the dwelling unit is within a half mile of a transit stop. A bus stop is adequate under the statute. You can't require additional parking for the accessory dwelling unit. Really, local regulation is limited primarily to public health and safety, and any development standards have to be objective, which that's a policy in the housing element, which is basically standards like the development, the structure shall be substantially consistent with the character of the neighborhood is not objective, because what that means is interpreted differently by different people. And so an objective standard is shall be set back 20 feet from the front yard setback. So that's a big, also seen across the board in housing element law that will trickle down. Is that your standards need to be objective. Any mixed use zone, if you're housing, it's like supportive housing, the standards that apply need to be objective. And when your standards are not objective, and you're dealing especially with affordable housing or supportive standard housing, those standards are basically set aside.
If I could add on to that, the board also today approved us applying for an HCD grant. Right. And part of that is to implement some of this, which would allow us to do such things as update a website to educate people how to put together applications for accessory dwelling units, how they can get permitted, what resources are available, what funding's available, how to coordinate with lenders, and that sort of thing. The other thing that we'd like to do with that, and it may be premature to bring this up, but it is something that I think we would really like to find a way to do, is to underwrite the cost of the permit processing, particularly for accessory dwelling units. It's our understanding that for like a $50,000 to $60,000 cost of an accessory dwelling unit, the fees associated with that are around $8,000. So if we could develop a program by which they could come in, get the building permit without paying those fees, that's about a 15 to a 20% savings in the total cost of that.
Meeting the definition of affordable. Yeah. And so is there, is it your thought that that can be part of a state program?
Yeah, actually, the Cal Home program is the governor, as part of this year's housing legislation, did modify the program to allow underwriting and actually program funding for income-eligible families for accessory dwelling units. That was previously a housing category dwelling unit type that was not within the scope of that funding.
Thank you.
Supervisor Best?
I would say, Michelle, I really appreciated your thorough presentation. You didn't even need to look at your notes. So I was like going, but I mean, I read through it, and I really appreciate, you really know what you're talking about, and I just appreciate that. And thank you. Actually, the whole team is wonderful.
Supervisor Madrone? Anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, first of all, thank you for an incredible job on all of the staff's part. I attended quite a few of the outreach meetings in the communities in my district, and there was a lot of participation. I mean, you look at the public comment on this thing, I think 170 or something like that, individual comments. So kudos to all of you for an incredible outreach effort in a tight timeline. And I really appreciate the effort that's been made to help the county move to a more proactive position of engaging the communities, engaging nonprofits, and others to try and start solving what we know is an incredibly serious problem here in Humboldt County, as well as many places. So I see a lot of really great elements that you've put into this to encourage a lot of innovative ways of getting this stuff done, like what you just said about the ADU approach of trying to reduce costs and stuff like that. I've reviewed the information thoroughly. I find it to be incredibly comprehensive on many, many levels, and I appreciate that work. So with that, I do have a couple of very minor amendments I wanted to offer up to my colleagues and to the planning staff to see if we might be able to do that. I certainly don't want to do a lot of tweaking around, because getting that letter from the state that says, this looks fantastic, we're ready to approve it, I don't want to mess with that. I know we have a tight timeline. We basically either do it today or next week to meet the August 31st deadline, or risk some penalties. So I don't want to mess with that either way as well. The couple of very minor things I think that I might suggest, you know, as we talk about climate change and our climate change policies and other kinds of things, and we think about how all of this not only affects the ability to increase our housing stock, and I think it was something like 41% of the need is in the low and very low income categories based on the median income information that was provided and the rest of it. And in order to not compound our problems of putting high density development in areas without bus service, without good pedestrian access and all those kinds of things, I am a little bit concerned about encouraging increased density development in rural areas. When you look at the housing opportunity zones, it does include several significant rural communities that don't have those services. And so that's a little concerning. And so looking at policy H-P1 on page 8-14 of Chapter 8 Housing Element, so H-P1, I would simply strike the last part at targeted residential density. 3 words to be removed from there. I don't think that would have any impact on state's approval. But in combination with that, we might carefully consider the housing opportunity zones and where we're encouraging this, and maybe not to be encouraging high density in areas that don't have those services because of the impact on fossil fuel use and other things. So that would be the first one, and maybe we'll just take these one at a time if that works for the chair.
Yes, Mr. Ford?
Yes, thank you, and completely understand what Supervisor Madrone you were saying here. We would want to point out, though, that targeted residential density is kind of a state buzz term.
Sure.
And their emphasis is on achieving or exceeding the residential density. So while that may not seem like a big change to the state mind, that may signal the county's backing away from wanting to maximize the number of units that are going to be produced.
Okay, I understand that. And really, I think perhaps more importantly is the maps of the housing opportunity zones and where we're encouraging that development. I mean, clearly, McKinleyville, Eureka, you know, these areas, they do have these services. But some of the areas do not. And so maybe it's a consideration that my colleagues and I want to make in discussion with you about, are all of these areas really appropriate to have increased densities to those targeted levels? If they don't have those services, we're kind of working at odds, you know, here in terms of increasing density in places where we're going to increase reliance on fossil fuel use. Where areas that don't have bus service, for instance. The bus does stop in Rio Dell, I believe, and Scotia. Is that correct? Yep. So that's good. And I know they're making great strides to try and improve pedestrian-friendly environments in those communities as well. Does WEOT have bus service?
We have bus service all the way to the south.
So they stop
all the way.
They stop
yes.
at WEOT.
We have Mars Flat,
Yeah.
Miranda,
Right.
and so.
Okay, well, that was a couple of questions, so I guess I'll go ahead and let that one fall by, and working with my colleagues on that part of it. But that was a concern. You know, perhaps it's really something that won't be a problem, so I can appreciate your input on that. The other one, I really like all the allowances for tiny houses, tiny house villages, the rest of it. There's a lot of us working to try and help the Hupa tribe reopen the modular plant out in Hupa that is currently shut, but it is state-of-the-art facility, completely wholly owned. And I've got some meetings with Department of Health and Human Services and others to try and see, now that we're having a more innovative housing element approach, can we find a way to take unutilized funding in the various counties surrounding Hupa, work with the tribe to reopen that facility to build tiny homes. One of the big problems out there was trying to haul full-size homes on the highway. The length, the width created highway patrol escorts, all kinds of extra costs. And so many in the community, including Kenny Spain with Headwaters and us, are working to try and figure out how we can take unutilized resources and put them to bear to create some of this housing that would in fact be affordable in small ways for a lot of people. So that's something that I'm very excited about, and hoping to move that forward rapidly. The other one was H-IM Implementation Measure 15 on page 8-24, also in Chapter 8. Facilitate development of sites in the affordable housing land inventory. And then it ends up, that particular paragraph and the incentives end up focusing on multifamily zones. And I would just like to offer a very simple amendment, facilitate development of all sites. So adding the word all in the heading there, of all sites in the affordable housing land inventory, and then add the word specifically at the start of that paragraph. So it doesn't change much. It just says, where we can, let's facilitate development in all sites in that housing land inventory. So those are two very minor edits, adding the word all and specifically. So it doesn't really change the intent of that paragraph, but it does help open it up. And actually further down in the paragraph, it does talk about all sites in those zones. So it kind of makes it more consistent. Feedback on that suggestion from?
We have no objections to that.
Okay, those are pretty minor. Just adds a little bit of intent there. So
where would you put this specifically before specifically the county shall allow?
So under implementation item 15.
Yeah, I know, but.
In the heading, I would add the word all.
Yeah.
And then at the beginning of that paragraph, specifically. So in other words, we're not just saying we do this in the multifamily zones.
Mm-hmm.
We're allowing a little more freedom for the planning department to consider this in all zones that are included in that affordable housing land inventory.
Mm-hmm.
Simple change, but actually has a big effect in terms of allowance of consideration, while still focusing on these multifamily zones. Not trying to change that focus, because that's where it's perhaps most appropriate.
Yeah.
So that's all I have on that end of things. So thank you for that opportunity.
Welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did have, no, that was it.
Yes, no? Good?
I'm good.
Perfect. All right, with that, I'll open it up to public comment.
It's your friend's time now, Estelle.
Hello, my name is Bill Rodstrom. I work at the Jefferson Community Center. And I just want to thank the planners and all staff on what a good job they did on this housing element. It does really provide for a lot more opportunities now. And I do think that the devil's going to be in the details more in the part two, what Michelle referred to, the zoning part. So a lot of these goals and implementation measures aren't going to meet our RENA goals without those zoning changes, and she alluded to that too. So I'm hoping that we have the opportunity coming up now to really expand the areas that we can increase density and the diversity of types of housing. For instance, along bus routes that we've talked about, like in McKinleyville, Myrtle Avenue, Harris, south of Harris, into Campton Heights area. A lot of those R1 areas could be R2, R3, and allow for more density within 1,000 feet of a bus route. So those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to, because I expect it'll be another public process like Eureka went through with their zoning. And that's a good model, but you might be able to even go beyond that. And I like the idea that after a year or two, see how we're meeting the RENA numbers, and you know that at least one of the planning commissioners suggested maybe we have to do inclusionary zoning if we're not really getting there to in the future after checking with RENA, because that's always been the problem with the last housing elements. You might have remembered 10 years ago the Find Our Lots issue. You know, the zoning wasn't there. So it'd be great if the zoning would allow development on smaller lots. And I'd actually like to see, I like that proactive idea, and if there's state money to help with infrastructure and helping with the roads, the water, the sewer lines, so that the contractor doesn't have to pay for, and add that to the cost of housing. The state used to, I think, pay for much of that. And if those funding sources could be looked for through HCD, which is the likely source, that could bring down costs for housing too. So anyway, I look forward to the next process, but it looks like we'll be passing this on. It sounds like a very good housing element, and I'm looking forward to the zoning part. Take care.
Thank you. Next.
Ken Sawatsky, ditto what the last speaker said. I've been trying to work with Michelle a little bit, and she'll have a little time after this passes, requesting an opportunity zone, actually two of them, for my two projects, which I've talked to you about, that I've been trying to do forever. Of course, both of these are going to incorporate my facilitating building the bus stops that would be necessary. They cater to the senior people or to people who would need that kind of a thing. Both of these facilities have the maximum amount of public services available. The one in Willow Creek doesn't have sewer because there's no sewer treatment plant. It may never be up there, and it won't service my particular parcel, but they're just outside of town, just a little bit past where Danco already has a rather large development in that area. And for staff to work with us, and I would like to try and get my 2 parcels, both the one on 96 and the one out in Supervisor Madrone's district out there in Glendale, mapped for this, I call it carrot zone. We like those carrots. There are those of us who are extremely interested in this. I had 2 other partners, 3 of us from Blue Lake Enterprises. We started out building 4-plexes, 10-plexes in affordable housing many years ago, and now all of us have a son that's interested son-in-law for one of them, who's interested in continuing what we do, including possibly building the tiny houses and working with that, even up in the Hoopah facility that was mentioned a little while ago by Supervisor Madrone. So we do have the expertise. We have access to it through a genetic osmosis of building affordable projects, and a skill set where, doing major subdivisions. It's not like this isn't what we do. So I appreciate the opportunity to get this aligned. I will be reaching out to some of the other people that have the financial capability. My one partner, just to know, he walks into Coast Central and they say, you have the most loans with Coast Central in Humboldt County. And yet we can't get a loan online through one of these things because I don't know why it is. But we have the financial ability, backing, and expertise to do these projects, and I look forward to working with your staff to hopefully bring at least the 2 I'm thinking of to fruition. Thank you for my opportunity to speak on this great housing element. Tiny homes and things like that are our future, and we can't do housing first on any basis with regular constructed houses. It's not financially viable. We have to think outside of the box, and this is the box I want to think in. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else? Oh. Somebody has to come up, or I'll close it.
Thanks. I'm Nezzie Wade, and I'm with Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives. Most of you know that for the last 5 years, we've been talking about a lot of these alternatives. I'm very happy that we have this housing element. It represents an awful lot of work for an awful lot of people. And I really appreciate all the community coming together in the places where they've held meetings and have spoken up and talked about the things that are necessary. I think we all know that these alternatives will be very helpful for folks with no resources or very few resources. And I've lived a lot of my life in that arena for quite a while now. So I'm very excited about the possibility of having some change. I know that we're still a far cry from that. Affordable housing for a lot of people is housing that's still very unavailable to a lot of the folks that have, they fall through the cracks all the time. So we hope to be able to close up some of that gap. And I want to say thank you to the planning department for being relentless and having the stamina to just do all that. That has taken a lot, and we're all really very appreciative. And I look in your faces and see that you're about to make some decisions too, and I really appreciate that you've given it full thought and consideration, and know that we are in a shelter crisis, and we really have to do something to pull ourselves beyond where we are, and I think this is the thing to do. So thank you very much, and thank you to the planning department.
Thank you. Now.
Third time is a charm, right?
That's right.
Coming from Southern Humboldt, I had to recycle some of these folders for your presentation.
Perfect.
Folders, so sorry about that. I only found out about 6 o'clock last night that I was
We like recycling.
seeing you. Yeah, I do too. So in order to make sure I don't forget anything, I'm going to read the cover letter that I have for this packet for you. Good morning. My name is Patricia Ray. I'm a volunteer in Southern Humboldt, interested and committed to creating options and solutions for our houseless community. My role and mission today is to provide you information about the houseless situation in Southern Humboldt. Your packet has information that addresses the key concerns our community faces. Many in our community are fearful of the houseless, and vigilante behavior has occurred in response to this fear. In 2007-09, I became involved with local efforts to develop and implement a critical weather shelter at our local veterans building. I learned about the needs and the various responses of the houseless population in structured shelter and housing. The houseless population has grown considerably since then. As part of the emergency preparedness team, I am drawn back into the role of helping to find a solution for our houseless community. This is not only a health and safety concern, it is a humanitarian crisis. Southern Humboldt Housing Opportunities is a committed community group that has been meeting for 5 years and recently formed as a nonprofit 501(c). SHOW provides critical weather, shelter, meals, clothes, and personal care items, with creating a tiny home community as a long-term goal. A safe camp model is a transition solution. Outreach efforts are ongoing in relationship to identifying and securing private or public property for long-term and interim goals to address the houseless crisis in Southern Humboldt. We are working together for the higher good. On the whole, the reception from the community regarding the letter, which is in your packet, I wrote, has been positive. The letter was locally published, and I used various social media to educate about the houseless. Outreach to local law enforcement, the Chamber of Commerce, as well as face-to-face contact with many folks over the last few months allowed our community to be informed about this safe camp. 2nd District Supervisor Estelle Fennell nominated me to the Housing Trust Fund and Homelessness Solution Committee. This appointment helps me to stay abreast of and connected to county-level discussion as we work together to find solutions, and currently to expedite creating safe camps. Winter is soon upon us. My group's goal is to assist campers to move from private property and other locations to a structured camp. Over the last few years, in-depth discussions with houseless people in Southern Humboldt revealed several priorities expressed by the folks living on the street. Access to showers and restroom facilities, along with safer, structured camping, ranked highest. We also found that these discussions that many preferred to live in a tent rather than a shelter, even in winter conditions. The A-Camp Constitution, which is also in your packet, are rules that a few of our local campers collaborated on for camp guidelines. It would take little to help our camper community to be comfortable, safe, and feel accepted. Communication and kindness will go a long way in creating this camp. A safe camp provides our houseless community with options. There are some persons that will be unable to tolerate a group camp. Should someone decide against the camp, they can be assisted into relocating elsewhere with their belongings. Another option is a bus ticket home or other locale. We have identified some potential state property in Southern Humboldt and request the Board of Supervisors' support towards acquiring this property. I appreciate your time today and thank you in advance for any support and assistance that may be available to help us move forward toward our housing goals. It is imperative that we establish a camp before winter. November 15th is our goal date. This property needs to be large enough for 30 campsites, 60 residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No.
Okay.
Next.
Could you start it now, please? Sorry. I'm already nervous. I'm here to ask that you make 3 changes to this wonderful document. They all relate to homelessness. The first is regarding standard S7. I would like to see this language that replaces the 10-year plan with the plan that you all adopted and with the strategy that you all adopted in your resolution a few years ago. I've got it here. This adds standards, specifically the standards from your resolution are that that the work be collaborative with the community, create a sustainable strategy and human infrastructure to implement the housing first. That's the strategy that you all adopted. The board resolution regarding policy, that's strategy. Regarding policy is already here in the housing element at policy P45. So this is putting the strategy of your policy into the housing element. There was concern that the county, there was concern about HHAC, which is an important organization, but that's already in the document at implementation 12. So the second thing I'm asking is regarding implementation 11. And I would like to replace the board adopted, let's see, the board adopted plan needs to be updated. And so I put the board adopted plan in replace of the 10-year plan. It needs to be updated, and that would include review of the 10-year plan. So doing both. There was concern about I included a number of recommendations. Those were only, these may happen. And the reason I included them is that conformity with the Housing First approach is important. Lastly, use of the shelter crisis declaration. The third change is regarding the shelter crisis declaration, and it is simply too important to be left out. If you look at I have a copy of the shelter code from the state, and it actually refers to you being immune from liability and other things in providing emergency housing.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you.
First of all, I want to share everybody who spoke that this is an extraordinary group. I could not be more impressed by the work they've done. What brings me back to this issue is, and I mentioned it at the Planning Commission, but I have a list of 26 people who died on our streets from July until April. And, you know, as I said, if that happened, if someone came and murdered them, it would be a crisis, it'd be world news. So the question I ask myself is, what is in this document? What is in the work? What is in the hearts and the spirits and the capabilities of you and our community that can do something that stops and prevents those kinds of deaths which are unnecessary? And what I found is, you know, it was tempting because actually I have about 3 feet more of these documents. Not kidding. I said, what is in here? I really want to find out. And I think in the 3 minutes I have, I could talk a lot about. One thing I want to stress is that even HCD says that you should not count shelters if it doesn't qualify, if the people you're talking about don't qualify. In other words, if you don't have a shelter for people with drug problems, you know, then don't count them as being, you know, being eligible for shelter. But here's the thing: when I looked at all the different people, you know, groups and cities and counties and laws, the key element was partnerships. The key element was vision. The key element was leadership. And so we have a wonderful document here. We have a community that cares. But I think what even matters as much is the leadership from all of you, because it's almost a joke. They keep making law after law after law about NIMBYism, like this law is going to stop NIMBYism. Well, it's not. You say you're going to put a shelter somewhere, you're going to get your phone's going to ring off the hook. You're going to put your political life in danger, in a sense, because people really don't want it. And so that's where I think we really can be the leaders because of the support for tiny houses in all different realms. There are different types. The ones that AHA are doing are based very much on self-management model. Others aren't so much. But the bottom line is that we have a chance here to really use the community and the partnerships that have started to create alternatives. And one of the models, I think, if people are listening, is to go to San Jose, because they early on took it on as an issue. And, you know, I don't have time here to read it, but they basically talk about that in their housing element, they talk about researching and exploring other options. So I would just ask, we don't stop at tiny houses. If you talk to AHA, they have a whole continuum of care that really starts with, as the one woman said, people are very different. So let's move on this. We need you to be the leaders, because you're still going to get your phones ringing off the hook. And the thing about tiny houses, I just want to say, is everyone I read about, they work to be good neighbors, and so you can sell that.
Thank you very much. Next.
There we go, that kind of works. My name is Scott Nelson. I'm a resident of Humboldt County. Thanks for listening today. I want to echo the remarks of everybody else and thank the planning staff for their outreach effort. They were willing to take the time to meet with community groups. They were willing to take the time to hear concerns of average citizens. I also want to point out that it seems a little bit backwards to me anyway, that the most important thing coming before the board today also happened to be the very last thing on the agenda. I think it is no surprise that when you look around, those of us who are to be able to be here to make public comment are probably not the people who are going to be helped most profoundly by this housing element. The folks that need affordable housing that don't have it in this county are not here right now because they're out working, or they're out trying to find a job, or they're out trying to find a place to live. I also want to point out that everybody in here is white right now, and that there's a distinct racial element to this. I also really appreciate planning staff at the county and in various municipalities here being really good about paying attention to that, about dealing with how, as we move forward, we can build an equitable county where we talk in a deeper way, not just about housing that's affordable, but about housing that supports all people, regardless of who they are and where they come from. Finally, I just want to advocate for two things specifically in the element. One, the element calls to the establishment of a safe parking pilot program. Right now, you have so many citizens in this county who get constantly hassled by county sheriffs who are just doing their job. Let's be honest. And people are not given the opportunity to have safe shelter, even though they may already have a vehicle to provide that safe shelter. This document starts to work on the implementation of creating a program that fixes that, and that's really exciting. Finally, this document also calls for the county to take an official stand on the repeal of Article 34. Article 34 is a California constitutional amendment that got passed in 1950 that actually started right here in Humboldt County, that said that you have to vote anytime you're going to provide more money for low-income or affordable housing. It has held back development in this county and across the state. And I appreciate the bold stand that is in the element to potentially repeal that. I think that's really powerful. And so I thank you for your time. And I hope that in the future we can continue to move forward in a way that lets more folks from the community be able to be here to participate on such an important topic. Thanks.
I appreciate that, and kind of wish this was the last thing on the agenda, but we have a full afternoon too, so appreciate that. With that being said, we do have a time set for 11 a.m. Supervisor Fennell, quickly.
Well, first of all, I think I want to echo what everybody has said. This is a lot of work. It's tremendous, and I really appreciate the proactive approach. I think this is a win-win-win for the county, for people who need the housing, and for people who are the ones who are actually going to build that housing. And so that's really, really important. And I'd like to also, at a future date, try and help the concept that Patty brought forward. I look at that as some way that if they have identified state property and the state is saying that they support those kind of activities, then we need to help them to get, give them a little oomph. So I'll talk about that in the future. But with that in mind, I would like to say I'd like to move staff recommendation.
Second.
Supervisor Madrone?
May I offer
And
this?
include those two on HIM.
And all.
It would add the word all and specifically
Yeah, that's fine.
to item IM 15.
15, right. I can include that.
I would also ask at this time that one additional minor amendment, because I also want to get this done. I think we've had a lot of good input from the community. I appreciate people showing up here today. But in the response to Mrs. Eggers' comments that were submitted, and she's done a great job of showing up at all the meetings and offering some suggestions, I see here in the response from Planning and Building on July 23rd, the board may consider amending the Planning Commission's recommended language to be inclusive of the Homeless Strategy and Implementation Plan Phase 1 and Resolution 16-30. So the Planning Department already said basically that'd be fine. If we could just simply add that amendment, it would be responsive to public comments. In regards to the other couple of comments, I think that staff have made some responses to that, and I can see the strategy there. But I would like to just add that one comment. It'd basically be adding the recommended language to be inclusive of Homeless Strategy and Implementation Plan Phase 1 and Resolution 16-30 that we passed as a board. So would the motion maker and the seconder agree with that second amendment?
As a seconder, I have a question. I did read it in here that staff said that they could support that piece potentially of language, but not the deleted language. But so I'd like to ask staff, because I don't know if we covered it, and I think the maker of the motion is trying to kind of
see where it fits. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, so if I could ask staff to weigh in on the response that was on this letter.
I'll just tell you a little bit about my thinking here. I've seen a trend in recent meetings where a motion is made, and then there's a lot of tweaking after that. And I'd prefer the clarity of voting on the motion, but I guess we can discuss it a little bit. So I'd like some more thoughts on
that. With respect to, through the chair, Ms. Eggers' comments regarding modifying standard H7, so staff would be in support of amending to be inclusive of Resolution 1630 and also the Focus Strategies report, but not to strike the language with regard to the 10-year plan, as that is also an important organization for addressing homelessness and those at risk in our community, even though they are a separate entity. They're valuable as well, so to be inclusive.
So with that in mind, I'd like, first of all, my motion was to approve staff recommendation with the modifications we discussed earlier on HIM 15. Can you help me make it very clear what this additional request would look like in the motion?
So, or you put it up there. So I think we would simply indicate that the county adopted 10-year plan to end homelessness and Resolution 16-30 and the Focus Strategy will guide the county's efforts to address the housing and service needs of the homeless and at-risk homelessness populations.
Have you got that, Brooke? Okay.
It's on the tape.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, that answers it. Thank you, through the chair. And I will also say that I do appreciate your concerns for tweaking things after that.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to be responsive to public comment. It's really, and it seemed like a simple suggestion that planning staff felt supportive of. So thank you for that consideration.
And staff has seen more than responsive to public comment, as long as it's inputted at the proper time.
Yeah.
I think that's the tweaking part, bringing things in at the last minute.
You bet.
Yeah.
And with that, with the changes, it's been moved and Seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None?
Another deadline met.
We are going to 5 minutes into closed session, then we'll return at 1:30. 5 minutes. Do you want to, could we have public comment on planning commission? Or no, public on our closed session?
Yes.
Do you want to read it in? Go ahead. I'm looking at you.
Before the board today. The first concerns pending litigation in the matter of blank versus blank versus DiMatteo. Second matter concerns a public employee performance evaluation for the position of the county council. The third matter concerns a conference with legal counsel regarding pending litigation in the matter of Jeffrey Blank versus County of Humboldt. That's a state court case number. Fourth matter concerns conference with legal counsel regarding pending litigation. That matter also is matter of Blank versus County of Humboldt. That's the district court case number. Final case concerns initiation of litigation regarding a single potential case. And I would rather take
Public comment?
This is what I do. Resolutions of cases can be difficult. I've learned from the best how to do it. Amy and I had a class in Virginia up there at Humboldt State. Of course, I got an A in business law. But then I went to the School of Hard Knocks. And I watched and I observed the best. Bill Barnum, Allison Jackson, Bradford Floyd, Tim Needham. I could name every single attorney that out there that settles this. I watch, I talk, and I listen. You're in a crux position right now. My recommendation is, number one, that anybody involved in any of this litigation not participate. Number two, listen to a risk manager, not to your attorneys. It's not in their interest to settle this. You're their cash cow, or the taxpayer is their cash cow. Listen to yourselves. You have 4 cases here. If you were able to offer this individual his court costs of maybe $150,000, rather than spending millions of dollars potentially should any of these cases go forward. We saw what happened to the county on some of these cases. Very simple to settle. Allison Jackson has, I think, you paid out $150 or $175 2 or 3 times on different cases. 4 cases, maybe for $150. Or some other offer. Come up with a reasonable offer, because time is of the essence here. You have, I believe, a court case on Thursday. If you were to propose this, go to their counsel, and mutually you would go ahead and ask the judge to continue that item, you would not have court costs for that particular thing, because you can do a deal and reach a settlement. It's not that difficult to do. Part of what it is, egos have to be put aside. Now, I think Jeffrey Blank is an exceptional county council. You had one issue here, and you've dealt with his concerns as far as I'm concerned, as far as that goes. So you usually look in settlement of cost of litigation. If you're having an insurance company and say, well, it's going to cost us $500,000 through the court process, and we still may lose another $500, they go ahead and they'll offer $450 or $500 and buy their way out. That's how the judicial system works. If you could do that, can you imagine just one of these cases costing us $1 million if it goes forward? And there's going to be amendments. You're dealing with a competent person and someone who can bring this forward. And I could see you have anticipated litigation, probably not one of his, but there are 4 or 5 major things that I've seen come up that could be spaghetti against the wall. If one of them stick, you're way out more than 150. Put the man back to work. He did a good job. You gave him a 4-year contract because he was doing such a good job until he had to go to the extent he did and file all this stuff, because that's the only thing people seem to pay attention to when something's broken and wrong. This is broken and wrong. You got an easy out here. I'd grab it really quick.
Thank you. With that, seeing no one else, we will go into closed session. I'm going to start the 1:30 session. I'd like to report out from
Sorry.
close, or just go right ahead. You can be like Estelle.
Okay, thank you very
Just
much.
fire off.
So, Mr. Chair, with respect to item number 2, I think there is something to report out. The board has authorized a contract with Todd Simonson for the purposes of concluding an investigation. There is nothing to report out from the balance of the items.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we will jump right into the time set for 1:30 with the auditor controller. Right? That's you guys. Okay, good.
Hello. Excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. We're in for a real treat. We have with us Rich Gonzalez. He is the principal auditor for the county's external financial audit. And he is going to walk us through the reports that they've issued, what they mean, what their purpose is, and then I will take the mic back and share with you what our corrective action plan is.
Okay.
All right, good afternoon, members of the board. Thanks for having me here today. It's my pleasure to present the audit reports for the County of Humboldt for June 30th, 2018. I'm going to start with the financial audit, which is basically the audit of the county's financial statements. People always ask me, what's the purpose of an audit? You know, what do you guys do exactly? Well, the purpose of this audit is really to express an opinion on whether the county's financial statements are free of material misstatement. Our opinion, we provide reasonable assurance, not absolute insurance. For us to provide absolute assurance, we'd be here probably year-round looking at every single transaction. A couple highlights of the report is happy to report that we issued or expressed a modified opinion on basically all of the county's funds and opinion units. There was one exception, which is kind of unique. We did issue an adverse opinion on the discretely presented component unit, which is known as the Fortuna Fire District. What happened is we were doing our audit, we learned that the board of the Fortuna Fire District was not the same board as the county, and that the county appointed their board. So as a result, we had to take it out of the county's financial statements and present it separately. But because the audit was 2 years behind and the capital assets had a modified opinion, we thought rather than hold up the audit, let's just issue an adverse opinion, let the county and Fortuna catch up, and then next year it should be clean. But in the end, we issued an unmodified opinion on all the county's funds and opinion units, other than that discretely presented component unit. The other highlight I want to go over is the implementation of a new standard, GASB 75, which the county implemented during the year. We call that the OPEB standard. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. Under the old standard, the county only had to report a portion of that liability because it was being amortized over 30 years. Under the new standard, the county had to report 100% of that liability. So what that did is that increased that liability by about $23 million, which also negatively impacted net position. Unfortunately, every county is dealing with the same issue with their net pension liability and the OPEB. But that was a major highlight I wanted to share with you since that had such a huge impact on your financial statements. The other report I want to go over is the single audit report. And basically, this report is an audit of all the federal expenditures or programs of the county. The purpose of this audit is to express an opinion on whether or not the county was in compliant with the major program guidelines. A major program is basically a significant program, either due to the high dollar amount or the complexity of the compliance requirements that we select for testing, and then we send a team out and do testing, at the departments. And you'll be happy to know that we had a unmodified opinion on compliance with no findings at all, which is great. Usually we always find findings when we're auditing eligibility for DSS programs, but no issues at all. Everything looked really good. Also in this report, we summarize all our findings for the financial statement. if I step back a little, there's 3 types of findings. You know, if I oversimplify this, you have your control deficiency, which is not very significant, but it's more of a recommendation, like, you know, you should consider, you know, doing this. This will make your job a lot easier. And those get communicated either orally or in a management letter. And then you have significant deficiencies and material weaknesses. Material weakness is a big deal. That means either there was a material misstatement that we discovered during our audit, or we found a control deficiency that could easily lead to a material adjustment. And then significant deficiency somewhere in the middle. It's still important enough to report in a single audit report, but it's not material yet. So this report includes significant deficiencies and material weaknesses. And I'm not going to go over each one individually, but if I had to recap these findings, there's 6 findings in total. 3 of them are reoccurring, and then 3 are new. And I'd say 5 of the 6 have to do with closing or cutoff, and then 1 of them has to do with that new discretely presented component unit, because obviously that was a material finding. You know, one thing I see that's very positive is I like the progress I'm seeing at the county. A good example is our first finding, 2018-1, with loans receivable. That's always been a big challenge for us. I always dreaded auditing that balance because there's always a big mess. There's so much high volume of activities, you know, different types of loans is always a big challenge trying to tie that number in the GL to the records. This year it was extremely clean and everything reconciled perfectly. In fact, the only reason we have a material weakness is because the county found a mistake that they corrected, but because it was a material misstatement, we had to report it as such. So, you know, we're definitely happy with the progress we're seeing at the county. Other than that, that's all I have for you, unless you have any questions about the single audit or the county report.
Supervisor Madrone?
It probably doesn't matter much, but in the report, it lists myself and Karen as in our positions as of June 30th, 2018. You know, maybe it's materially not that important because we're the ones now receiving the report. I know Karen and her office have really been the ones to help produce a lot of the materials to provide for the audit and all that. So does that matter that we weren't actually the ones as of June 30th, 2018, and really what you're reporting is the current state of affairs? I wasn't sure if it mattered or not. It's pretty immaterial, perhaps. Okay.
Do you?
Let's not worry about it. It doesn't, I wasn't sure. You know, accuracy is important. I know that's important to the auditor's office as well. So
Yeah.
that was the only thing I have at this point.
Anybody?
That jumped right out at you.
There you go.
Yeah. I was like, wow, I've been in office for a year and a half.
No, I just want to say thank you. It's always extremely helpful to go through this, and it's always very good to get good news, you know, and also to be provided with information that can help us move forward in even a better way still. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
I'm just glad to hear, like every other year, no fraud, no stealing, no anything. So thank you.
It's really good.
Supervisor Bass?
Yes, I am appreciative of hearing mostly good news. We know it's not all good news, though, and that there's things that we're talking about having a corrective action plan. And so while I really do appreciate that you're seeing an improvement while you're, you know, coming back up here and checking things out, you know, I think hopefully next time you come back, you'll even be more pleased.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping too.
Okay, so now I'd like to redirect, because I do want to address the timing issue. I also was concerned that my name was attributed to an audit report where I wasn't in charge, but we have to consider the timing of it. This audit report that we're providing to you is for the year that ended June 30th, 2018. Right now we're in August of 2019. A lot of time has passed, a lot of changes have already occurred that would make this report different. When the so for the fiscal year ended 18, the county didn't actually close the books until October 10th of 2018. By that point, we had missed our scheduled field work with our auditors. And because they're busy auditing all the other counties, we had to be pushed back to March. So March of this year, the CLA team came and did the audit field work. Of course, they're working off of information from the last fiscal year, but there is a component of the audit fieldwork called subsequent event testing, where they're looking at everything that's happened since that year ended up through the day that they issue the report. When they did issue their report, June 6th, a lot of the findings took into account the things that happened as of 18, and in your governance letter, he also brought up concerns that about other things he noticed happening after that date. So I want to point you to the single audit report. That's the skinnier report. On page 13 is the summary of all the auditor's results. And I'd like to point you to two key checks. The number 2, were there material weaknesses identified? Yes, there were. And I'm going to walk you through the corrective action plan that will outline what steps the Auditor Controller's Office is going to take to make sure that we don't have that again. And then number 6, does the auditee qualify as a low-risk auditee? You'll see that it's a no. There are 2 different situations that would make a county or an auditee a high-risk auditee, and that's when there are material weaknesses, which we do have, and when the audit report is issued after March 31st of the subsequent year. For this year, we met both of those qualifiers, so we are technically a high-risk county auditee. What that means is that auditors now have to increase their level of scrutiny in the items that they review for us. It also displeases our grantors. Something that we've experienced is grantors from the state and from the federal government started notifying specific departments that there were issues with the audit and that it could threaten the funding. Once we provided documentation and proof that our audit was completed, just not by that March 31st deadline, then the grantors were very gracious and allowed the funding to continue. But this is an issue that we definitely want to prevent going forward because, you know, one time is courtesy, a second time is now this a habit, and they won't always guarantee that we'll get funding. So with regards to the timing for this fiscal year, because the audit reports weren't published until June 6th, that only gave us from June 6th to June 30th to address any issues for that fiscal year. Now we're trying to go back in time and make adjustments to the financials to make sure that we at least address all of these significant balances that were unreconciled, but there's still potential that there will be similar findings. Of course, not the same ones because we are working hard to address them, but I can't guarantee to you that we will have a unmodified audit for fiscal year 19 with no findings. So I'm telling you that now. The corrective action plan will help us for 2020. And what it takes is the county working together, the auditor controller staff, having the sufficient resources it needs to make sure that we get all these things done in a timely and accurate manner. For this fiscal year, we're anticipating that we will close the books on September 20th. Back in May, I sent a year-end memo to all departments letting them know the timeline of when we expect to stop receiving accounts payable, accounts receivable, adjustments, journals, and when we expect to have a period of reconciliation where the auditor controller staff can look through all the funds and make sure that all of our balances reconcile. So we anticipate that will be September 20th. That gives us a 2-week period to do any minor adjustments before the auditors come on the week of October 7th. I do also want to point out that I am very grateful to all of the staff in the Auditor Controller's Office because right now, we are currently operating in the current fiscal year, operating in the prior fiscal year. We're getting all our time reports and balance reports for the cost plan that is due November 30th. We have to get the information together for the county's financial transactions report that's due to the state. And we have 13 dependent districts for whom we also have to prepare these financial transactions reports. Let's see, what else are we doing? And then we're pioneering the whole system in one solution. So we're learning and implementing accounts receivable modules so that we can keep track in real time about all these loans receivables that are going on. There's also an upgrade to our financial software that's scheduled for October that we're working in partnership with IT, so we have that going on. And we're hosting trainings to all fiscal staff in all departments. Most recently on Friday, we hosted a journal entry training at the Sequoia Conference Center and 70 people attended. So we are doing a lot with the 11 people that we have, and we do anticipate that in order to maintain the level of service that you expect from us and that we can maintain the actions in the corrective action plan, we anticipate that we will have to come back to your board and request additional funding for staffing. When I do so at that point, I will make sure that every preparation item is complete so that you have a complete request for your consideration. So the corrective action plan is the document that looks like this. It's a template. A lot of counties follow this same template, so I don't want you to feel that this is out of the ordinary. We do go through each finding. There's 6. We recap what the recommendations are by the auditor, and then the action planned in response. This gets submitted to the Federal Clearinghouse along with our audit reports, because all of our grantors want to know that aside from having all these findings, the county is actively taking steps into addressing them and fixing them, so that eventually we can be identified as a low-risk auditee. For loan receivables, as you've seen in the audit reports, we did have a material misstatement that our auditors did rectify for us. What we're going to do now, with the help of our senior accountant auditor, Jim Hussey, he has implemented the accounts receivable module in one solution. He has designed and developed fee codes, customers, so that we can give these resources to all the departments and say, every time someone owes you money, give us the information so that we can post it in real time, so that we can send bills on a monthly basis and make sure that we're doing everything we can to collect the money that is owed to the county. And then as the money is received, we're making sure that we get notified so that we reduce those receivables in real time. The goal is for your board, for the CAO's office, for any department to be able to ask on any day, how much is owed to me? I can pull up a report and show you. And what's historically been happening is departments have not been offered these resources by the Auditor Controller Department, so they've had to make do with Excel spreadsheets or outsourcing to other softwares. By implementing the accounts receivable module, we're going to bring it all in-house. We're going to have a uniform system. We're going to offer consistency to everyone so that then it doesn't matter if you have high staff turnover, everyone can still follow that same model of how to record accounts receivable. And you don't have to go here and there and here and there to gather all the information you need. You'll have one central location. That's for audit finding 1. Audit finding 2 is about the year-end closing procedures. Historically, the Auditor Controller Department has been winging it. Who's available? Who can handle this account right now? Who can handle this process right now? And our year-end memo was interpreted as more as a suggestion and not as an enforceable deadline. What we're doing now is we're providing departments with the information up front and telling them what they can expect. And as that date comes by, we're sending reminders to let them know, hey, this deadline is coming, and then when the deadline comes, we mean it, we're done, we're moving on to the next step, because we have no time to waste. We don't have the privilege of extending deadlines because we do rely on our external auditors' calendars. So what we're doing there is we are documenting our process. We're doing a time study to see how long it takes one person to complete one task, and we're going to have that in a complete document that we can provide to our auditors and that we can provide to the county so everyone's on board and everyone understands what year-end process means. For finding number 3, it's excessive number of funds. What we're doing here is we are reaching out to departments and asking them to identify to us the purpose of all these funds. Why were they created? It was the board in on the creation. Show us the board item that authorized this creation of this fund. Is it being used the way it was intended to? Is it legally mandated? If we find funds that are not legally mandated and they've just been used because that was what they thought they needed to use, we are taking steps to incorporate those funds into the department's budget units so that we can eliminate those funds. We have hundreds. How many funds do we have, Rich? 150? 150 trust funds that's separate from our operating budget units. So we need to narrow that number down to an amount that we can actually reconcile, one that we can keep track of. 150 funds with a whole bunch of activity in it is a lot to keep track of. And this is something we're doing in partnership.
Supervisor Fennell?
Oh.
Yeah, could you tell me how active those are? I mean, what kind of activity is happening in them?
They vary. Some funds have not had any activity for years and they just have a carrying balance that rolls over every year. Some funds are highly active where we are collecting payments from the state on behalf of somebody else and we're forced to be the intermediary. We don't get any benefit from it. We just have to hold it. Those are called custodial funds. We accept the money, we give it to the next person. This is all that's happening. But there are specific rules with custodial funds. There can't be any commingling. The county cannot derive any benefit. And there are some funds where, it's not because anyone's trying to do something shady. It's because lack of training, lack of understanding, that they have become commingled. So we are having to weed all the commingling out, identify the ones that are custodial, and limiting the activity in there to all pass through. And then the remaining amounts have to be allocated somewhere else, either through someone's operating budget unit or to a different fund that would be more appropriate.
Thank you.
And Rich, out of this, I know every year we hear about these accounts, and so they've been there for quite a while. And I think like 100 of them are stagnant, right? Or like 2/3 or more. I think you've said in the past. I've been listening to 10 years of these. This is.
Yeah, there's quite a few that don't have a lot of activity.
And commingling and everything else, and the state still gives us money for them, and they do the audits. I'm just wondering why we haven't done this before, or just we have a savior in place now finally, or were we that inept before? Or, I mean, you'd like to have answers because people are going to ask. So.
I mean, my experience in doing a lot of county audits is departments love their trust funds. They're used to them. They're comfortable with them. For some reason, they like to put the money in a trust before they move it to operating, and they like to move the funds to the operating, as they need it.
Well, talking to other counties, this is more standard than Humboldt's out there all by themselves on an island, right?
Yeah, the biggest difference between Humboldt and other counties is Humboldt's not very consistent with how they're tracking these trust funds. So the accounting it's very difficult to follow. I know we always dread auditing the trust funds because we have to identify, okay, what's the revenue, what's the expense? And what's happening is you have some departments that, they're reporting the revenue and expense to one generic line item, trust fund revenue, trust fund expenditure. So we don't know what that is. We have others that are netting the revenue and expenses. So we don't know what the true revenue and expense is unless we go into each fund and gross out the transactions. It's just a lot of work, and we don't see the need for a lot of them because it seems like a lot of these, trust funds, all they do is just create more complex accounting. Why not just take the funds and just deposit them directly in the operating fund where it's going to be expended out of? I don't really see the point of depositing them into a trust fund and then moving it out of a trust fund where you have to do a JE, and then you're expensing it. And then what happens is you're double counting because when the trust fund receives it, it's revenue. When they move it to another fund, it's expense. That fund's recognizing revenue again, and then they expense it out again. So, we're trying to eliminate that double reporting. And that's if they're using the revenue and expense. What we're seeing is a lot of departments are netting the two. So it's really hard to identify what's really happening.
Okay. All right.
Okay. We are taking active steps to address that. We are limiting the use of those generic lines, the trust fund revenue and trust fund expenditure, and putting the burden on the departments to explain to us, where did this money come from? What is the funding source? What am I cutting a check for? What am I really paying here? And also, we are limiting the amount of checks that are cut out of these private fund, or not private, but these trust funds. We want to make them viewable by the board. We want the board to have this information when you consider the budget. So we are taking active steps to address it. We're also putting more scrutiny on the journal entries that we receive. Why are we transferring money? If the revenue was recorded over here, we're not going to also record it over here. And we take into consideration the timing of events. So if the revenue was recorded in year 1 over here, we're not going to record it as revenue when you transfer it out in year 2. That revenue has already been recognized. We're going to enforce that it be a transfer in, not a revenue line. So it's all just accounting rules that we're enforcing, and we are taking the steps to meet with departments and training them on why it's important, why it looks different, why it's been so long that anyone's ever said anything to them. And I will stress again, this is not because someone is purposely trying to mislead the county. I think it's just they use the resources that were available to them at that point in time. My focus now is to make sure that whatever services the auditor controller is providing are consistent to all departments and are within the guidelines put forth by the state controller's manual, by generally accepted accounting principles, by government auditing standards. There's so many rules, so many people telling us how to do our job. So we're working our best to make sure everyone's on the same page. Okay. Finding number 4 is that component unit classification. It was about the engine that was purchased for Fortuna Fire. That's what triggered the, hey, what's going on with Fortuna Fire? I have met with the fire chief at Fortuna Fire, and I've explained to him what the finding is. He is more than happy to have us come over to their fire district and look at their inventory and start keeping track. I'm also going to invite their external auditor, Keith Borges, to do a walkthrough and inventory observation with us so that he has the information when they do their independent audit as well. And the 5th finding is about revenue recognition. Historically, because we didn't have a receivable module and because we didn't have any staff dedicated to helping departments recognize revenue in the correct periods, the county was just posting revenue when the check was finally received, regardless of which period it was earned in. This year, we are the front lines. We're making sure that when money comes in, we're looking at the check stub. What are they paying us for what period? And by doing that, now we're able to know, like, even though we received the money today, August 20th, if it says it's for revenue earned in June, I'm going to post it as of today. That's when it hit the bank. But I'm going to do an accruing journal entry to show it as earned as of June 30th. So that when they come and do their audit for that fiscal year, they'll be able to see that we earned revenue even though we hadn't received it yet. And then similarly for the last finding, 6, that one is for payables. So revenues and payables. Payables is, did we pay this invoice in the right fiscal year? The consideration is the cash handling and the period in which you recognize something. I'm not going to pay something on year 1 and say that I paid it next year. If it hit the bank, that's when I'm recognizing in the bank. But it also depends, is it applicable for next year? The most common example for this county is when an employee wants to attend a training. They have to register for it up front. They could register for it in May, but the training is not until August. May and August. So in May, we're paying it. We cut that check. It hit the bank. We are not going to leave it as an expenditure for that first year. We're going to adjust it to a prepaid expense. That's an asset to the county. We've paid for a service that we have not yet received, and we expect to receive it next year. When we do finally go to the training, then we're done. We've netted out. We recognize it in the right period. We attended in the right period. Our bank reconciliation's great. Everyone's happy. So those are the 6 findings that addressed in the corrective action plan and the steps that we're going to take to address them. As with any new tasks, we are relying heavily on training materials, cross-training. Before coming to this presentation, I sat Rich down and I said, I have questions for you, just bill me later. Here's all the, answer these please, I need help. And I'm also making full use of my networking groups. As an auditor controller, I get to be a member of the CalSACA group, that's California State Association of County Auditors. And that has put me in the same circle as all the auditor controllers in our surrounding counties and throughout the state. I have all their business cards now. Some of them are even my Facebook friends. And I do not hesitate from picking up the phone and asking them, how does your county handle this? How do you make sure that your county is in compliance with this? And it's been fantastic. Everyone that I have met has just been happy to help. And I mean, Shasta County is a great example. They also use one solution. I sent them an email and I said, how in the world do I do this? And they said, oh, no worries, here you go. And they sent me screenshots of all of the setup in one solution. Everyone's more than happy to help. So I am very hopeful, and I want to pass that hope on to you, that just because we have all these audit findings right now doesn't mean that we're not going to be better going forward. And we are making the best use of the staff we do have, but please keep in mind that this is a big burden for any department to take on. And I do anticipate coming to you again. And let's see, what else did I plan for myself? I do want to highlight that a lot of departments have been very helpful and have been very collaborative and communicative with our department. We've met with aviation, the sheriff's department, library, economic development, DHHS, the treasurer tax collector, public works, probation, and all of these meetings have been very constructive. Everyone has special needs because every department serves different functions. But overall, there's been this enthusiasm to get us all on the same page and to make the system that we paid so much money for work for us instead of us trying to work for it. There's also a lot of good communication going on with other entities that collaborate with the county. So Fortuna Fire, Lolita Fire, they're also dependent districts. We met with REDEC, that's the Redwood Regional Economic Development Center, and with First Five. And similarly, they've just been waiting for us to be able to provide all these services to them. I would like to share with you some opportunities for growth and opportunities to send out a unifying message for the county. I feel that by enforcing these accounting rules, we are promoting consistency and also helping the departments ease during any staff turnover, because everyone will have the same instructions, the same models to follow. We're also hoping to promote county-wide procedures instead of department-specific procedures, because every time a department has an exception to the rules or a different way of doing something, it can confuse the people who are having to reconcile everything at the end of the year. It takes a lot of time, it puts a lot of burden on staff, and it's really not necessary because the county is one entity. We have one county treasury, so we should all be following the same rules. I also want to clarify that there is a difference between the budgeted amounts and the actual amounts. The budget is the most educated guess that a department can make about what they intend to spend. And because so much emphasis is rightly placed on budget and staying within those boundaries, it's almost confusing some departments who think that they have to force the financials to look like the budget. And so I have put a lot of emphasis on your budget is what you've presented to the board that you intend to do, but they know that life happens and inflation and I don't know, all kinds of things happen that could affect the costs of running a department. So what the actuals are going to do is show what actually happened, what you actually spent in the actual place where you spend it. I intend to bring forward an item to the board soon to show that after we close the year, because we're implementing all these corrected accounting practices, it will have a significant impact on the budget. We're going to a lot of budget appropriations are not going to tie to the actuals. It's not because someone is purposely overspending or underspending. It's because at the point that they adopted that budget, that's what they thought it was going to be. Now, as we implement all these corrections, it's going to change. So I am going to bring that up, and I am going to tell you then what I'm telling you now. No department should be penalized for us wanting to correct the financials. The budget is important, and I anticipate that it will be balanced as we start getting comfortable with the new way of tracking accounting transactions. And then urgent needs, staffing. I'll say it again, staffing. Okay, on the horizon. So in addition to all these cool things that we're doing right now, there are big plans. One is capital assets. We have to modernize the way we track capital assets, making sure that new capital assets are tracked timely and retired capital assets are removed from the balance sheet. GASB 87. GASB stands for the Government Auditing Standards Board. And they issue statements that tell us what we're supposed to do and when and why. They have issued statement number 87 that relates to the tracking and reporting of leases and lease activity. Historically, the county has been able to expense leases if they were short-term leases or if for whatever reason we could categorize leases in different manners. Now with GASB 87, they're saying no. Leases are tracked as leases, and in situations where the county is the lessee, we have to recognize a liability on our balance sheet. Where in the situations where the county is the lessor, we have to record that as an asset. And there are exceptions for it. If it's less than 12 months, you don't have to. But there is also the caveat that you can't have the same lease going on for 20 years and not capitalize it just because it's less than 12 months. If you anticipate that you're going to have this lease long term, best bet is to capitalize it. And I especially love the paragraph in that GASB 87 statement that says the board, GASB, does know that there's a cost-benefit analysis and that some counties will feel the burden of implementing GASB 87, but tough cookies do it anyway. You'll laugh later. So what this means is we have to have it implemented by July 1st of 2020. It means, as a county, we have to gather all of the lease information we have in all the various departments and have one central location where all the leases live, and we have to make sure that all the capitalized ones are capitalized. So it's going to be a big undertaking, and I intend to form a GASB 87 working group where we invite key people from the departments so that everyone's also on the same page. And in order to join this very prestigious working group, they have to read GASB 87. I'm saying it now. And then the dream, the goal, the vision is for the county to have a comprehensive annual financial report. I just heard that Mendocino County just issued their first one. We have to do better than Mendocino. So goal first is fix all the findings, get our accounting stuff in order, and then have a comprehensive annual financial report that we can provide to the public, to everyone in this department, to all the other counties, to all the grantors, and make our auditor's job easier because he's so nice. Okay, I think that's everything, but of course, if you have questions, I'd love to provide answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have questions. I think you and I have talked separately offline, and I did want to say I really appreciate your taking advantage of training opportunities. I see in July you had some staff down to a CSAC training, and I've seen I've actually gone to trainings in other areas, and some of your staff has been there. So I do want to say thank you for doing that, and I think it's really important to have those connections, as you're talking about, throughout the state, and having your staff be able to do that is great as well. So I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Supervisor Madrone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, it's amazing to me how far we've come just in the last 7 months with you at the helm. And I just really want to applaud you and all of your coworkers, because there was a lot of things that were out of order. And again, not that anybody was trying to do the wrong things or bad things, but I really appreciate the work of your coworkers, yourself, and really trying to help bring this county into shape with a good auditing process, accountable systems, and all of that, and especially dealing with the trust funds and all this. And the way you're working with department heads, you know, I hear from them, none of this is easy. None of these changes are easy for anybody to start having to learn a new way of doing things. But I appreciate the communication process that you're using to work with them. I think it's fantastic, the progress you've made. I applaud you and your coworkers. And I say coworkers, you know, we always kind of call our staff, you know, it's like, well, they're coworkers, you know, and you're all in this together, and I feel you've really been building a team. And again, I just applaud you and your coworkers for all of that hard work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will say that I am nothing without the staff in the Auditor Controller's office. Each one of them is to be thanked for all of the success we've had.
Absolutely. As well as the department heads and the workers and all those other departments that are all also trying to deal with things. I mean, we had some stuff going on at the airport that was difficult, and Cody and his workers are working on those things. So all of these things are, I see tremendous improvement, and I look forward to the next audit report.
Supervisor Fennell.
Well, it's nice to see the change, a nice change, someone who's actually excited about this kind of stuff. That's fun. So thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Exactly. Public comment?
Ken Swatsky, as I go through life, I collect smart people. And one term I use for them is little sister. And so I also have nephews, you know, and brothers by another mother and father, and those kind of people. And I consider Karen to be one of the sharpest people that I attempted to collect. During her life, she's always been someone who could talk to me, and someone who I value the opinion of. And that's important for all of us. So I just wanted to thank her for being here. I'm doing the best Jedi mind trick I can to see that nobody poaches her from us. Always look forward to seeing her and her family, probably about 2 weeks from Monday. And a lot of people are out and about. And we are very lucky to have this quality of a person who can work with other people and who can help you correct prior problems and help you eliminate future problems, such as litigation and or having the powers that be irritated with you where you don't get funded. Can you imagine how drastic it would be if the state were to pull our funding because we weren't moving in the right direction? And that's kind of where we were. That's not where we're at right now, is my understanding from the people that I know in the different forums. So thank you so much for her being here, and thank you so much for working with her and accepting and understanding. I think you're beginning to understand her talents the way the first couple minutes talking with her, I sensed them. So I'd like to take credit for things even though I don't get to. Appreciate the fact that hopefully our auditor, outside auditor, will have less work to do. That probably decreases the bill. I don't know if that's a contracted amount or not. We might have to negotiate that contract sometime. The town of Fortuna, their fire department is the wealthiest district that I ran into as far as per capita, and so they don't have a financial problem as far as the money goes. I checked out all the fire districts at one time, and they're very, very well funded. Let's put it that way. Thank you for straightening out the problems with all these accounts. It alleviates a lot of the possible misconception by the public that we are not being transparent. And that's something all of you, I think, will enjoy when it's time to be reelected or to do other things. The perception that you're transparent and working with Karen is what gives you that credibility with me and many others. Thank you for my opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. I'm Regina Fuller, and I'm the Deputy Director of Sheriff's Administration. I've been with the county for just a little over a year. Prior to that, I worked in nonprofits and private sector. I've had a lot to learn in my 1 year being in charge of the Sheriff's Department's budget, and I have to say that Karen and her coworkers have been incredibly supportive, have been very helpful. They've helped me muddle through things that didn't feel very organized. You know, when I was here earlier with the sheriff, when we did the budget, we did a pretty major change with our budget to make it more transparent, and that really could not have been done if it weren't for Karen and her coworkers. So I also would like to echo Supervisor Madrone's comments in saying thank you very much. This is the first time that I have been in a fiscal year that ended June 30th. And, you know, these are our best Humboldt County summer months that we all just absolutely want to be out in the sunshine, soaking up the sun. And Karen and her team are like laboring in an office with no windows and, you know, endlessly all summer long and on weekends to take care of our financials and close year end for us. So I just wanted to publicly thank them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Good words. With that, I'll bring it back. And we'll accept the reports.
I would move that we accept the reports.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
There was also the recommendation to approve the engagement letter to retain.
That's correct. 2 engagement letters.
2 engagement letters.
I think that was in there, wasn't it?
I would move that we approve the initiation of both engagement letters.
So in other words, he's saying he'll approve
Yes.
staff recommendation.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank
you. Interpreter.
You helped.
Keep us in line. And that's, do we need a second and a vote on that? Okay, okay. Aye. Unanimous. All right. Wow. There we are.
We're done.
That's it.
And with that, we will adjourn.